Namaste and greetings. I, Remat Arora, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI #Web Policy Learning. Today marks the inaugural day of Feminism, Theory and Praxis, an online international winter school program, a 3-day immersive online certificate training course. This training program is organized by IMPRI Gender Impact Studies Center. To kick things off, let's begin with a concise overview of the program. IMPRI has a rich history of organizing events on feminism, having successfully conducted 2 previous events, Feminism Fundamentals for Sets and Future in 2023 and Feminism and the Global Social Transformation in 2022. Building on this momentum, we're excited to commence Feminism, Theory and Praxis. This program is dedicated to delving deep into the multifaceted realm of feminism. Throughout the program, participants will have the invaluable opportunity to explore the rich tapestry of feminist thought, spanning from its historical origins to contemporary manifestations. Topics will encompass various feminist movements, intersectionality, the pivotal role of feminism in addressing global challenges, and strategies for gender-inclusive policy making. What sets this program apart is its strong emphasis on the practical application of feminist principles. Participants will gain actionable insights into how feminist theory can effectively translate into real-world action, both at the individual and societal levels. Our aim is to empower participants with the knowledge and tools they need to actively contribute to dismantling gender-based inequalities and fostering more inclusive and equitable societies. The chair of this program is Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, Visiting Distinguished Professor, IMPRI. This program has an excellent panel of experts who will be sharing their expertise for the duration of the program. The distinguished experts for today include Dr. Leena Pujari ji, Associate Professor and Head, Department of Sociology, KC College, Mumbai. Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, Visiting Distinguished Professor, IMPRI. Professor Linda Lane ji, Senior Lecturer, Department of Social Work, University of Gothenburg, Sweden. Dr. Chitra Sinha ji, Academic, Author and Gender Diversity Expert. Professor Dr. Saumya Uma ji, Professor Jindal Global Law School and Director, Center for Women's Rights. Professor Indira Ramarao ji, Professor of Eminence, School of Social Sciences, MS Ramarao, University of Applied Sciences, Bangalore. Ms. Irene Santiago ji, Peace Advisor, Local Government Academy, Philippines, Chair Emerita and former CEO, Mindanao Commission on Women. Ms. Frida Akhtar ji, Executive Director, UBI NIG, Policy Research for Development Alternative. Dr. Shewli Kumar ji, Associate Professor, Mumbai Campus TIS, Chairperson, Women's Center Social Work, School of Social Work, Mumbai Campus TIS. The panel of conveners comprises of Dr. Simmi Mehta, CEO and Editorial Director, IMPRI, and Dr. Arjun Kumar, Director, IMPRI. Proceeding further, I welcome all the participants to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for being interested and putting your time, energy, and effort into understanding the pivotal role of feminism in addressing global challenges, while helping us bring together the practitioners and participants through this course for impactful policy research and action. We have also shared the course outline and reading resources in your email for your kind perusal. Before we start today's session, I would like to remind the housekeeping announcements once again. Please join the meeting on time. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation. Share your questions on the Q&A box. The questions must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise. Refrain from making general comments in the question to save time. Now, without any further ado, let us start the program. It is my honor and privilege to invite the chair for the program, Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, to start the program with her opening chair remarks. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Remat Arora, for introducing the course. And welcome Dr. Leena Pujari, Dr. Linda Lane, Dr. Shewli Kumar, and esteemed participants. Thank you, respected Dr. Arjun Kumar and Dr. Simmi Mehta, convener of this course, Ms. Ashtaba, Ms. Priyanka Negi, Ms. Vidhita, Ms. Vaishali, for taking initiative in putting this course together and also ensuring participant of veteran feminists as resource persons. There is a tremendous interest in the term feminism, I think, over the last 10 years that we have been seeing. And in India, especially after the Nirbhaya tragedy, younger generation is more curious about it. There may be, you may hate feminism, you may like feminism, but you can't ignore feminism. Right from the time of publication of Vindication of Rights of Women in 1792 by Mary Wollstonecraft, we have seen that collective efforts of feminists have been to strive for transformative change guided by principles of women's liberation from the patriarchal control over their sexuality, fertility, and labor. Foundational principles of feminism are co-creation of knowledge based on experiences marked by critical thinking and self-reflection, commitment to collective wisdom of fellow practitioners fighting for the women's rights and transformative change for gender equality, no dichotomy between public and private, that's a famous slogan of feminism, personal is political, efforts to challenge internalized patriarchal biases and misogyny in oneself as well as among all with whom they interact. So feminists fight for gender equality for everyone, including women, men, transgender persons, non-binary people, and most feminists agree on 5 basic principles. 1, working to increase equality and equity, expanding human choices, not only for women, but for all human beings, because patriarchy controls everyone, eliminating gender stratification, ending sexual violence, and promotion of sexual freedom, and also taking charge of your own life, determining your own destiny. Feminist theory often focuses on analyzing gender inequality. Themes often explored in feminist theory include discrimination, objectification, especially sexual objectification, oppression, patriarchal dynamics, stereotyping, the art, culture, tradition, and also what determines the sense of aesthetics. Feminist praxis, as it is defined, is a process of moving from feminist values, whatever vision, mission, goals, objectives, and very important, the utopia that we have to put it into actions based on these values. At an organizational level, we also expanding the choices, opportunities, spaces in the arena of education or reproductive rights or empowerment in the socio-cultural political life is very important. And over last 200 years, we have seen that for the first time, this kind of collective endeavor were made by women, because our patriarchy always believes in dividing women, while feminism believes in uniting women. Praxis is the blending of theory and practice and can also be understood as a process by which theory is embodied and enacted. Praxis is theory in action. Praxis is an important companion of feminist theory. As Bell Hooks discusses in her article, and I quote, feminism, a movement to end sexist oppression. Like, there is no feminist movement without praxis. Lifestyle feminism isn't enough because theory is not an end in itself to the problems it analyzes. Praxis is a Latin term, and it means doing and acting. But these two simple words do not give justice to complex series of events that one's body must coordinate in order to produce praxis. So there is a philosophy, the actions are guided by the philosophy. Whether you acknowledge or not, feminism has provided women of the world with increased educational opportunities, right to vote, protection against workplace discrimination, right to make personal decisions about marriage, motherhood, participation in public life. Feminism has also succeeded in challenging pervasive cultural norms about women. May they be double standards of sexual morality, practices such as female genital mutilation or witch hunting or widow burning or female infanticide, child marriage, dichotomy of public for private for women and public for men. Feminist praxis has facilitated women's entry into the quote-unquote intellectual world that was historically the monopoly of men. Today, we begin the course with profound epistemological concern and perspectives of feminist praxis by three stalwarts who have been dedicated teachers, outstanding researchers, and renowned practitioners of feminist solidarity. They are none other than Dr. Leena Pujari, Dr. Linda Lane, and Dr. Shewli Kumar. And we feel honored that the three of you have and all other resource persons from India as well as other Asian countries have like Dr. Irene Santiago, Farida Akhtar, and Dr. Indira Ramarao. All of you have agreed to be the resource persons for this course, which has enhanced its value, and you can see the kind of enthusiastic response that we have received from women and men. Thank you very much. Over to IMPRI.
Thank you, ma'am. I would now like to welcome Dr. Leena Pujari ji for an address on feminist epistemology. We welcome you, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rahmat. Thank you, Dr. Patel, for that wonderful, you set the context for the talk, for the sessions that are going to unfold today. Thank you, Dr. Arjun Kumar and the IMPRI team. It's always a pleasure to be on this platform. And also congratulations. I was just telling Dr. Patel that you have been able to sustain this session on feminism for 3 years, which is just wonderful. And I'm also going to draw significantly from what Dr. Patel spoke about feminism in terms of reflexibility and public-private dichotomy, so on and so forth. All right. So I think I have been assigned the theme feminist epistemology, and I always say it's epistemologies because, there's no one feminism. There are many feminisms, just as there is no one woman, but many. So I think it's a nice thing to, let me just sort of begin with a little story. And then, of course, I will request IMPRI team to screen the PPT. Maybe you can, to share the PPT if it's with you. So, yes, I can see it now. Thank you. So, Patricia Hill Collins, in her book, Black Feminist Thought, speaks about an incident. She said, she quotes from somewhere. She cites it, in fact, not quotes. And she says that, a young girl was walking with her mother and they passed by a statue. And the statue was of a European man overpowering a lion. So the little girl went up to the statue, looked quite puzzled, and asked her mother, Mother, are you sure this can happen? I mean, the lion is so ferocious. How can that man overpower him? So the mother looked at the little girl and said, don't forget the statue has been made by a man. I thought this would be a good entry into the discussion on epistemology because we're asking questions about knowledge and how is knowledge generated, what is valid knowledge, so on and so forth. So to begin, very quickly, let me begin with sort of unpacking how do we understand epistemology and a little bit on feminism. So I think epistemology, can we go to the next slide? So it's an overarching theory of knowledge that asks questions about what is knowledge, how do we know what we know, what are the forms of knowing, who is the knower, what is valid knowledge, and how is it produced? Now, these are philosophical questions, and epistemology originates in philosophy. But how these questions get answered is important because that decides who gets heard and whose knowledge claims are validated and who gets left behind. There are two other terms that go with epistemology, so I'll just briefly tell you. One is, of course, paradigm. Paradigm is these are basically frameworks, interpretive frameworks that define how we analyze the findings. So, for example, intersectionality can be one framework, and there's methodology, which is broad principles of how does one go about investigating issues. Now, of all of these three, I think the level of epistemology is very important because once that is settled, then we know about what frameworks that we can use to analyze the findings and what methodology can we use in our research frameworks. Now, feminism, I think I'm assuming that most of you, it's a diverse profile I know, and I'm assuming that most of you know what is feminism, but it's a little better to clarify because given the kind of misconceptions that the term feminism is generally mired in. So very quickly, I'm going by Sara Ahmed's understanding of feminism, and she says that, feminism is a politicized understanding of one's lived realities. And if I may add to that, I think feminism is an awareness of systemic inequities and interconnected nature of oppressions, okay, the intersections, basically. So having said that, let us understand. Can we go to the next slide? Let us understand about, so let me just kind of tell you about the conventional epistemology, or or maybe the positivist epistemology, and how do we understand that. Conventional epistemologies, or the dominant frameworks of knowing, that's how I call them, they would have us believe that, how do they say the reality? They say the reality is out there. It is waiting to be discovered, and there is a special expertise of science which can investigate and explain as it really is. So basically, the idea that truth is out there waiting to be discovered or unearthed, but through a very objective process of inquiry. So the pursuit of truth has to be a very objective process of inquiry, where all values have to be eliminated, except perhaps the idea of rationality. Now, because, researchers have widely differing values, experiences, and emotions that emanate from their class. It can come from their class, race, sex, etc. The genuine science is thought to be unattainable unless all human characteristics are eliminated, okay, except rationality, which is all right. And once the reality is discovered and known, then it can be universalized. It can be applied across all situations. Now, what we see here is a process of, there are two processes that are happening. One is the process of decontextualization, which is, the context is not important at all. And the knower, or the person who is pursuing truth, okay, kind of becomes detached observers and manipulators of nature. And the particular contexts are no longer important. They are being abstracted and they are being universalized. Now, it's also a very disembodied process where the social location of the knower is no longer important. I mean, so for example, all of us come from different social locations, right? And what we produce, what we know, what we create is mediated through our social locations. But our positivist epistemologies, or the traditional frameworks of knowing, which have been dominant for the longest time ever, and I think we all have been schooled in that kind of epistemology, told us that no, but this kind of detachment is important, and your social location really does not matter. I mean, after all, just remember that you are an impartial observer, that you are a researcher, and that detachment is important, okay? So this dominant framework of knowing obviously came from the natural sciences. It came from the pure sciences, and all the social sciences model themselves after it. I mean, whichever subject you were in, whether sociology, political science, all of them adopted the traditional epistemological frameworks to understand, to teach, to disseminate the received wisdom, so on and so forth. However, in the late 70s and 80s, this dominant framework of knowing that originated in science was contested, not just by feminists, but also the peace and ecology movements, by the Black movement, so on and so forth. But of course, among the philosophers and the feminists of science and sociologists, can we go on to the next slide, please? I think we have done that. Can we go on to the next slide? Yeah. So, among the philosophers and feminists of science that I was saying, these are some of the names. And there were others as well, but I'm just looking at these given the constraints of time. So we had, Sandra, it began with Sandra Harding, the science question in feminism, that was 1986. Then it was, of course, Donna Haraway, Dorothy Smith, Patricia Hill Collins, Nancy Hartstock. And as I move along in the presentation, I will draw on each one of them here and there so as to kind of weave, interweave all together. So, you know, the contestation came from them, and all of these feminists mounted a strong critique. It was a scathing indictment on the way knowledge had been produced and the kind of masculinist assumptions and the androcentric discourses that proliferated our knowledge systems, right? And a fundamental question, in fact, can we go on to the next slide? Yeah, you know, and the knowledge that was produced was, as I said, full of masculinist discourses, right? And everything. I mean, you could see it. Problems to be investigated reflected male experience. The narratives were androcentric. Theoretical frameworks reflected masculinist assumptions, and the entire, in fact, symbolic order by means of which, you know, knowledge claims were being made privileged the male and imagined the female as the other, as that which lacked masculinity. The margins and their stories, their narratives, their frameworks, their lens was completely missing from the process of knowledge production. In fact, Janet Wolff talks about how masculinity has operated as the core and the foundational principle of the social. For instance, to the epistemological question, who can be legitimate knowers? The answer has historically been not women. Right? In the beginning, I raised this question about who can be a knower and whose knowledge can be accepted or considered as valid. But historically, it has been established that women knowledge cannot be produced by women. So women, or the critique, in fact, in building their theories, the philosophers asked, when they asked questions, for men, it would be always about what is their potential. And what are men like? For women, the question was, what are women for? And what are women for? And the answer was very clear. It was about biological determinism and associating a woman's body with everything that happened in the space. That was not the public space, but in the private space within the four walls of the home. And so critics asked, feminists asked, and why have women not been the subject of knowledge? I mean, invariably, women have been the object of knowledge, right? But never the creator. And so this was, and it's not surprising if we can go to the next slide. If you see, there are these are some interesting things which I thought I could put it for you. And, our great scientists and our philosophers and people who made history, people who created the entire corpus of knowledge for us, people who eulogize, who we celebrate very often in a classrooms can be hugely problematic, whether it's Aristotle or whether it's Charles Darwin. And I don't think I have to read it for you. You can see, especially the one Aristotle, who was a philosopher, and the kind of, he says women are apt to, they are likely to scold, strike. She's more prone to despondency and less hopeful than the man. So invariably, there is an association with a woman's body. Everything that is associated with women. Can we go on to the next slide? In fact, Emily Martin talks about how language is very important, and the kind of language that we use to generate knowledge, to sort of construct knowledge, is of course hugely problematic, even in biology textbooks. And don't even assume that this is just a Western context. In fact, we had a session in our college on gender and science where the resource person, Dr. Geeta Chadda, was in fact doing this, and she was asking one of the teachers, it was meant for faculty members, if they still continue to do this, if their books still continue to describe it. And in fact, they said yes. How you understand the movement, how for women the reproductive functions become paramount, but even here how she's inferiorized or made to appear extremely fragile and vulnerable, and so on and so forth. So you have Picasso, for whom women are made for suffering. You have Rousseau, he says women have to be thwarted at every stage because their only job is to please men. So if they at any point of time become too smart, they have to be thwarted so that they can do the natural role of pleasing men, can come more naturally to them. So now if you look at all of this, you also realize, can we go on to the next slide, that there are a series of kind of dualisms and binaries that have characterized knowledge production. And Dr. Patel was just telling us about the public-private kind of dichotomy. And we see that in all of this, we see that one end of this column, one part of the column, if I may put it that way, is privileged than the other. And invariably, it happens to be associated with men. And can we go on to the next slide? I think the next slide is, okay. So now the questions that we were asking is, right? So the feminists, the questions that they asked is, so, now can we look at this whole thing of, we need to ask ourselves if the pursuit of knowledge is apolitical, as the positivist epistemologists would have us believe. I mean, they kept saying that the process of knowledge production has to be an objective process, totally detached, and the social location of the knower really does not matter. So the question that we're asking is it so? If the social location of the knower or the person who is creating the knowledge, or even the known, it does not matter, then why do we see what we see? How does one explain, okay, that the entire, all the theories, all our so-called knowledge systems that are revered are created by men, and not just men, they are created by men from a particular location. They are primarily in the Western context, from Europe and America, cis-het men, able-bodied men. And this is very important. And so naturally, therefore, one is not surprised that they produce, that they create what they themselves are familiar with, what they themselves are doing all the time, or the kind of activities that they engage with all the time, right? So one important thing, so the knowledge always bears the imprint of the producer. Certainly, to say that it doesn't, in fact, this was something Sandra Harding speaks very eloquently, and she says to say that social location does not matter, and to not examine the context of discovery, or the context where knowledge is being produced, is actually impoverishing the idea of objectivity. Because if objectivity is the pursuit of truth, and you wish to discover truth, you are not able to do that. You're stripping it of truth. Because when you do not examine the context of the discovery, the truth that comes out of it is a very shallow truth. It's a very hollow one. Can we go on to the next slide? So there are definitely, we need to, and here, this is what I wanted to show you. If you see Rousseau, Aristotle, Picasso, Immanuel Kant, Charles Darwin, all of them that we spoke about happen to be men. And now one has to link the emergence of masculinist discourses with the creator, right? And this is something that we need to understand very well, because I think even as students, we just lap up whatever we read. We don't really ask questions about where is it coming, who is the author, where does the author come from. Because the process of knowledge construction is not a very value neutral, it's not a very sanitized process, right? It is political. The process of knowledge construction is political, and feminists are telling us this, right? And we must not lose sight of the fact, because if we appreciate what we read better when we understand when it is coming from. And this is true not just of people who create knowledge, it's also true of teachers who teach in the classrooms. It's very important to know the location. For everything that we do, everything that I say, everything that I speak comes from a certain location and is important for, I mean, this is something that I read again in Patricia Hill Collins and Bell Hooks. I just love reading the works, and she very beautifully describes. She says, I gave my students the work of a certain Black scholar and his work on feminism, right? So the students, in fact, she said, the students said that, but we want to know the details about the author. If you do not tell us the details about the author and just give us this work and say, analyze, we won't be able to do it, right? And that's a wonderful way to do it. So, any time that we do, I come from the discipline of sociology, any time that you do a social thinker, be it Comte or Durkheim or whoever, it is important to understand and ask, what is the context in which they operated? Where did it all come from? Okay, so then, we can see here, all men, all white from a certain region. And they are in fact making knowledge claims for everybody, including the margins, with such eloquence, So then knowledge is certainly not an apolitical pursuit of truth as it is made out to be, but certainly political. Can we move on to the next slide? Okay, so out of this critique comes or emerges a very different way of knowing, very liberatory, very emancipatory. And as I said, different ways of knowing, which has come out of feminism. So hence feminist epistemologies. And this was, of course, an attempt to correct the epistemic injustice, that kind of underpins the dominant frameworks of knowing. So the first thing is that and I'm going to just kind of elaborate on a little bit on some of the characteristic features of, so this is the broad principle. There are these finer nuances, but I think these are some common themes that run across all feminist epistemologies, whether it is Black feminist epistemology, or whether it comes from a liberal space, or whether it comes from a queer space. So, the first is, of course, socially situated knowledge. This idea of situated knowledge came from Donna Haraway, and then, of course, it also came from Sandra Harding, who, in fact, used it in a slightly different way. So the idea of situated knowledge is that knowing and knowers are socially situated. I mean, we all come from different social locations, and our social locations does impinge on what we know and how we know. And the process is not, we can't subtract this process or this our personality or where we come from the process of what we learn, what we construct, and what we disseminate. Okay. So we experience the world from a particular social location. This impinges on what we know. So this was a broad idea, but of course, feminists have developed this idea in different directions. So the idea of situated knowing has been developed in a very interesting direction, a very prominent one, by feminist standpoint theorists who say that they talk about a very interesting, feminist standpoint theorists say that the process of knowledge construction must begin from a position of social disadvantage. Must come from oppressed communities. Or in other words, they are saying that, maybe there are two ways of knowing the world. So, for example, those of us who come from marginalized communities, we hold a kind of epistemic privilege. That is to say, those who are socially underprivileged are more likely to develop a deeper understanding of the world than are those who occupy a socially privileged position. So if I may just explain this a little more for your understanding. So for example, we are anyway schooled in the dominant frameworks of knowing. So we know about it, right? So for example, whether it is tribal students or the Dalit students who go to, this is in fact a problem that has been articulated a number of times by Adivasi students in India, where they go to schools and they do not learn much about their culture, but they learn a lot about the dominant viewpoint, the dominant way of understanding things, which can be quite alien to them. And the dominant way of learning very often, holds them responsible for their backwardness. So I have had books, for example, and I've read such books, what we call foundation course books, where one of the reasons mentioned for Adivasi backwardness apparently are the Adivasis themselves, because they refuse to learn, they are not interested in learning. Now, that is precisely one of the reasons why, in a research conducted by Nandini Sundar, very renowned anthropologist from D School, she says that one of the reasons why tribal students drop out of schools is also because this way of learning, that the indigenous and Adivasi epistemologies do not figure anywhere in our systems, right? And you feel very alien, lost, and you feel the system doesn't value you and doesn't acknowledge you. And so you don't want to be part of it, right? So the feminist standpoint therefore says, so the Adivasi students, for example, in addition to learning the dominant way of knowing the world, also have another way of knowing the world, which comes from their own experiences. It comes from a position of oppression, right? And something which comes from a position of something that you've experienced, okay? is a better way of understanding, okay, than something that you learn from books or hear about, right? Of the two sources of knowing, perhaps the one which is experiential is more credible, has more value. And in fact, Black feminists have always looked at it that way. They make a wonderful distinction, for example, between wisdom and knowledge, right? And Patricia Hill Collins says that Black women know that simply knowledge is not enough for them, because knowledge is what comes from books. Along for them to survive, right, as Black women, it's very important to have wisdom. Then you know how to survive, right? And that is something, that is a skill that is perhaps not taught to you in an institutional framework, but that is something which comes from your own experience, and you learn how to navigate and negotiate those circumstances, right? So the idea of epistemic privilege is the idea that people who come from socially marginalized communities, in addition to having the dominant way of understanding things, also have access to a different way of understanding the world, right? And it is important for us to understand that well. Now, this has also been discussed by Dorothy Smith, and she uses a term called bifurcated consciousness. And she says, she's a feminist sociologist, and she says that and she was a single parent, a mother of 2 small children when she joined the academia. And she says, I felt like I was inhabiting 2 different worlds. When I entered the world of writing, research, and teaching, I was supposed to leave behind everything that defined me otherwise. So my embodied and embedded self, the fact that I'm tied to kinship structures, family, household, I was supposed to leave all that behind and enter a world which is very cold, very distant. She said, I found it very cold and distant and very detached. But that's how we are supposed to be. And she says this is bifurcated consciousness. And I was caught in this kind of 2 realms. I had both the consciousness, okay? But I was it seemed as though, it seemed as though I didn't belong to the world of academia, because it seems so different. And it didn't even acknowledge where I came from. It didn't even acknowledge my troubles, my anxieties, or whatever that came from being a single parent and a mother of 2 small children. This is also something that Du Bois refers to, he talks about double consciousness, the learning, the white frameworks of knowing, and then, of course, the Black experiences. So the oppressed then draw on the insights of the privileged, because they have been schooled in the dominant frameworks, and along with their own understanding and experience. And in fact, these forms of knowledge, right, the situated or the feminist standpoint theory, or they allow for subjectivity between knower and the known. They rest in the women themselves and not in the higher authorities. So in that sense, very liberatory. And I experience directly in the world and not through abstractions. So the other important characteristics is the interactive forms of knowing. Now, feminist epistemologies, they center the idea of critical dialogue and engagement with others. So the pursuit of truth is not an individualized and ambitious project that is undertaken. It is more of a collective affair. It is more of a collective affair that there is an engagement with the community, and it comes out of discussion, deliberation, criticisms, and reflection, and then you open up to criticisms, and then you kind of reform. So this process of knowledge construction is a process that goes with the feminist understanding of solidarity. It is based on what we know is, it is connected. It is not based on a kind of separation between the knower and the known. It is based on a connectedness, which is to be, of course, which is a far more illuminating and enriching way of knowing the world. And Bell Hooks puts it very beautifully. She says, dialogue implies talk between subjects, and it's not a speech of the subject and the object. It is a more humanizing speech, a more egalitarian way of looking at the world. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay. Just a sec. Okay, so we spoke about, no, can we, I think we've, yes, this is where we were. Okay, so we talked about interactive forms of knowing. I did speak about knowledge and wisdom, and of course, a heap see, but a few know. A lot of them see, but a few of them know. That's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Then, of course, we move on to the a primary, in fact, epistemological assumption underlying the use of dialogue in assessing knowledge claims is that connectedness rather than separation is an essential component of the knowledge validation process. But that also then takes us to the idea that, one has to be very conscious of the ethical dimensions of epistemic practices. Because, what is the relationship between the knower or the subject and the feminist ways of doing research? Feminist epistemology clearly understands that we do not believe in an hierarchy between what has traditionally been known as a subject and the object. Both of them are subjects. Both of them are creating knowledge through a research process, and there is subjectivity, and there's nothing wrong with bringing subjectivity into the whole realm. In fact, Sandra Harding, when she's responding to the critics, and she says, when people say, the critics said that you are compromising on principles of rigor and objectivity in research, she says not at all. In fact, standpoint theory can actually achieve true objectivity. Right? Otherwise, objectivity is compromised when you do not, as I mentioned earlier, examine the context of the discovery. So, this is where we also talk about how there might be power relations that are embedded in the process of knowing. And therefore, we have to be very conscious of whether we are introducing the power relations. As Dr. Patel said in the beginning, feminism is a lot about reflexivity. As feminists, we have to constantly ask ourselves these questions about our privileges and about whether we are introducing something that creates a kind of, we are doing something, talking about something that brings in a kind of barrier between us and between us as a knower and the others around us. There's an ethics of care that I think is central to feminist epistemologies. The ethics of caring suggests that personal expressiveness, emotions, and empathy are central to the knowledge validation process. This is a form of knowing based on connectedness, which I spoke about just a few minutes ago, connectedness, where truth emerges through care and empathy. And I always tell this to my students, because as students, I always learned, this is what was told to me, that, when you do your research, don't bring in this don't identify too much with the respondent. Don't bring in this kind of values, just go and do your work and finish it off and come back. So, and this has always kind of bothered me. And I think what is very important for us to understand, because if the entire idea of constructing knowledge, if the traditional epistemologies, this is what they say, that reality is out there, we have to discover it. Truth is out there, it has to be just discovered. But the whole the pursuit of truth, if you want to, if the whole idea of being objective, detached, and impersonal is because you want to get at truth, then I don't think this process can help you. On the contrary, if you can sort of institutionalize a principle of care and ethics in the research process, if the respondent reposes a kind of trust and confidence in you, you will anyway get to the truth of everything. So one of the respondents in one of the research said that somebody asked her, but you said you opened yourself up to the researcher, and she said yes, because the researcher could empathize with me. The researcher understood my problems and was willing to sort of work towards eliminating it, or eliminating the conditions that produced it. That kind of confidence, that kind of reassurance made me feel good. Why would I tell someone who is indifferent, who is not bothered about what I'm going through? And that's the kind of, Sandra Harding's response to this whole idea of strong objectivity. And she says, what is this whole process of strong objectivity? And how it is, and introducing subjectivity into the process doesn't really take away objectivity from the whole thing. So truth may not emerge through a detached and impersonal mode of knowing, but truth definitely emerges when there are emotions and ethics and reason are used as interconnected essential components. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, and then coming to a critique, it's not that the feminist epistemologies have not been critiqued. One major critique has been that they also have universalizing tendency. I mean, if, for example, feminist epistemology or feminist critique had a problem with the positivist ways of knowing the world, and which essentially believed in universal values, then the feminists are also doing the same thing. I mean, we one because of the idea that women is not one but many, and who is producing this feminist way of knowing? Where is it coming from? Again, it is being located in a certain context. But of course, they have responded well to this, and they say that it is not about just, feminist epistemologies are many and diverse, okay? So for example, non-Western women have a problem identifying with the Western way of looking at things. Adivasi women would have their own epistemologies. Dalit women would have their own. The disabled, the non-binary, the non-normative would have their own way of looking at them. You have queer epistemologies also. So certainly there is no universalizing tendency, because that feminism is very reflexive, has opened itself up, has responded well to criticisms, and has made an attempt to course correct in that sense. So there are many. It does acknowledge differences within the category women. The idea of, I think I will sort of just kind of, I did speak about it, but just to elaborate it a little bit, when Sandra Harding says that standpoint epistemology is not in contradiction with the goal of achieving objective knowledge. On the contrary, she says it will increase and strengthen our ability to achieve objectivity. And her argument is interesting. It consists of two things. She says, first, that even if researchers were to follow the most rigorous rules of traditional methods of doing research, they would not be able to achieve strong objectivity. This is because these methods leave unexamined the context of discovery, which they consider as non-rational and therefore not to be considered at all, and therefore exempt from analysis. And because these methods neglect, the social desires, interest, and values that have shaped the sciences, science presents itself as subjectless, totally disembodied and context-free, context-independent. But she says, no, science does have a subject, which is of course the community of dominant men, the males, and this subject has a standpoint, and that is a perspective involving assumptions and values based on the kinds of activities that they engage in. And traditional science leaves this standpoint unexamined, and thus the whole idea of achieving objectivity is something that is lost sight of. Science, in fact, she says, science could never ever achieve objectivity. It was just an illusion that was created. And she, in fact, advocates a methodology that involves starting from the lives of marginalized people. She argues that this will generate, if you start from a marginal position, you have a deeper understanding of complex social realities, and you will also be able to generate critical questions, that thus producing less partial and distorted accounts. And for feminists, the purpose of epistemology is not just to satisfy intellectual curiosity, it is also to contribute to an emancipatory goal. So our epistemologies, of course, have to be reflexive. Next slide. So I think to conclude, it's very important to place and record the fact that in this kind of alternative epistemology, values lie at the heart of the knowledge validation process, and it is based on connectedness where truth emerges through care and empathy. And yes, this is a question that I'm often confronted with in the classrooms about emotions and ethics and reason. And I think it would be absolutely fair and just to say that neither emotion nor ethics is subordinated to reason. Instead, emotion, ethics, and reason are used as interconnected essential components in assessing knowledge claims. I think I shall stop here, but I'll be happy to take questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll open the floor to questions now. So if anyone has any questions, you can put it in the Q&A box. Vibhuti, ma'am, if you would like to make any, if you want to get the chair's remarks.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Leena Pujari, for explaining feminist epistemologies with ample examples of social theories, philosophical discourses, and scientific discussions that have taken place over last 500 years. I think I would say right from the time of Renaissance. You also mentioned Aristotle, and that means right from the Greek civilization, how the male-dominated discourse has defined epidemiologies. I think what you brought out very important points that all knowledge is situated knowledge. I think knowledge doesn't exist in vacuum. All knowledge come from someone, somewhere, according to their social location, it takes shape. Second thing you said about the lived experiences are knowledge. So that is very important in feminist discourses. And I think also in the queer epistemologies or disability studies epistemology, where the real life first person experiences, they contribute to knowledge, and also they validate a knower's credibility and also shape what standpoint, where do you stand in the power relations. Third point is very important, that is the power shapes knowledge. So that means a knower's relative position in the hierarchy of social power contributes to greater knowledge and deeper ignorance. The fourth point which emerged from your lecture is that with knowledge comes responsibility. That means once you know, you have to use that knowledge to change the situation. Okay, so here comes the role of praxis. So knowledge one constructs as a real consequence for real people, and the knower is personally accountable to one or more communities for how they do knowledge. So the way we are doing gender, so we have to use this knowledge for changing the reality and changing the power equation in the favor of equity and equality. Knowledge comes through collaboration. I think you talked about the co-creation of knowledge. The most complete knowledge is created through kaleidoscopic dialogue, collaboration, reflecting multiple different points. And also it includes the literal interpersonal sense, like how it incorporates the broader understanding of collaboration. So what we call a collective wisdom. So I think in feminist praxis, collective wisdom is very important. So I think these 5 very important points, and if we see the history of feminist movement, I think all these 5 points have played a crucial role in shaping the course of women's liberation movement, and so many changes that we have seen over last 200 years. Thank you.
I have a question to Dr. Leena Pujari.
Yeah.
I just put it on the chat. I just want to reiterate it. You kept reiterating about standpoint theory, ma'am. I would just like you to throw some light on how that would interact or empower. What are the dynamics of standpoint theory as they interact with Dalit feminism, as intersectional feminism? You mentioned intersectionalism only once, but you reiterated the standpoint theory throughout. So can you throw some light, some flesh out how standpoint theory would work in terms of intersectional?
Yeah. Yes, certainly. Thank you for your question. But one thing that I, in fact, which is also very important is the other critique has been that the whole idea of experience has also been critiqued a lot. I mean, who can speak for whom? This is something that has been. So if, for example, can I speak, if I'm a cis woman, can I speak for someone with non-normative gender identities? I mean, so we can just be their allies, but can we speak for them? I mean, these are also, I think these are questions that are coming out, and we don't have easy answers to these questions, because these are dilemmas that we're constantly also confronting in the classroom as well as the movement. To answer your question about a standpoint theory, I think Dalit feminists have very clearly articulated their position, especially in the Indian context. They have been very critical of the initially of the Indian movement. They have seen it as being dominated by the upper caste and the upper class, and their concerns, of not being accommodated in the early women's conferences and women's movements that used to happen at that point of time. In fact, we've had some very interesting writing by Dalit feminists who talk about this and of being left out, and they in fact a very interesting thing is this idea, they in fact punctured the idea of solidarity and commonality of oppression. So they said, no, I mean, we cannot join hands with you. Our fight, when you say that all women have to come together to fight the men, I mean, patriarchy seemed to reside in men. They refused. They had a problem with it because they said that we don't want to be our men's equal because our men themselves are not equal in this world. Right. So there are three layers. They spoke about patriarchy, they spoke about caste, and they spoke about class. So these three layers come in, and that's how the intersections come in. Intersection, you have a session, next session is on intersectionality. I don't think I can talk about feminism at all if I don't talk about, it's only intersectional feminism that we talk about. I'm sorry, Dr. Vibhuti Patel, were you saying something or is it someone else?
No, I just wanted to say that Dalit feminism talks about external patriarchy and internal patriarchy. So it's a double whammy for them that because of the external patriarchy is so voyeuristic and sexualizes their body, and they just, their existence is nullified by the external patriarchy, which is a caste patriarchy and class patriarchy, and its reflection and the emasculation which the Dalit men face, which also comes out in terms of more control and more violence against Dalit women. So this is a very important thing, internal and external patriarchy. Yeah, thank you.
I think there are a lot of questions in the Q&A.
Yes. So there are 15 questions. I think, Dr. Leena, you'll have to take one after another.
Okay. Yeah. So there is someone who has also raised her hand. So should I take this or should I look at the Q&A?
Amrita ji is ready with her video. Amrita Saikia, yeah, why don't you go?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Amrita.
Ma'am, actually, I put my question in the Q&A, but
Yes.
I cannot
Okay,
see it.
It's okay. So you can add. You can
Yeah,
speak.
you can ask.
So I'm a postdoctoral researcher in Germany. I recently started. And, what I have observed here is that the Western researchers and the academics, they're interested in regions like India, they're interested in Bangladesh or, all the developing nations. However, they're not interested in what you call the marginalized methodologies. They do not go to the field. What they do is they produce work from the secondary data, from the existing literature. So how do we challenge that? How do we tell them that the marginalized methodologies are important, and now it is not just producing works of producing knowledge by referring to the secondary data alone. So it's been quite difficult for me here, coming from India and working with people from the northeast of India. So I do not seem to get that kind of what you call the importance or attention, because the level, they talk about foreign policies, they talk about it's the level of discussion is very elite. So it is very difficult to figure in that discourse, like to bring in my research into that. So how do I challenge that?
So that's another kind of marginalization, no?
Exactly,
that happens within the academy, but we have a rich body of ethnographic work that has happened in India, and it's just wonderful. Right. So field work, especially ethnographies, are happening. And
if I have to refer to something like which I can use in my work and then to challenge this, would you recommend anything?
So what is your area? What is the area of work? You can probably follow which discipline that you come from.
So mine is, I'm an interdisciplinary researcher. So I come from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, from background of disaster studies with peace and conflict specialization. So yeah, and I'm working on women affected in conflict and their role in peace building.
Okay,
Love the camera center.
we have we have a I can probably send you those links and stuff like that, which you can refer to. You can also follow Doing Sociology, which is their website has amazing videos and sessions on ethnographic work, including women in conflict. So you'll find a lot of matter there, which will be very, very useful for you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Do follow that, Doing Sociology.
Right.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes,
you are audible. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, my question is that when women write autobiographies, there is a multi-layering of voices, and that they try to justify the knowledge system. So, are they at disadvantageous position when they are presenting themselves somehow in their autobiographies, because they could not speak against the system, specifically for the marginalized women? What's your opinion, ma'am?
So, in the ecosystem that we occupy in the academia, even today, I see that autobiographies and, this kind of ways of knowing that emanates from the personal is still looked at with a lot of skepticism. And there is a suspicion about what's happening and where is that rigor, where is that your objectivity. These are questions that you will invariably be asked, okay? But I think autobiographies by themselves are wonderful ways of understanding, wonderful ways of knowing. These personal experiences do matter a lot, absolutely. Maybe Dr. Patel can add to that, but
yeah, I think, see, the Sharmila Renge has done a analysis of 27 autobiographies of Dalit women whose lives changed after they took part in Mahar Satyagraha under the leadership of Baba Sahib Ambedkar. And I think that created a completely new discourse on caste, class, and gender, no? So I think autobiographies, even autobiography, say, of Savitribai Phule, or even the Kavya Phule, which describes in verses what all they have done, or the discourses that happened during the 19th century social reform movement. I think they tell us a lot. So many issues which are now which we are trying to address now, they were addressing, no? So that also gives you the strength that this is the legacy we have, because it's always said that those who don't learn from history, they repeat the mistakes of history. So from
Very
that
right.
So yeah, biographies that way, and also autoethnographies. A lot of autoethnographies are being done today.
Yeah.
That's and yeah, it has a lot of value and significance, without doubt.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ma'am, I have had a question. If I'm audible, I guess I'm audible.
Yes.
So, ma'am, this is Anvesha. So, I'm a PhD scholar in TIS Mumbai. So, as you were talking about various strands of feminist knowledges, various feminist epistemologies. So, I had this question that, am I audible, ma'am?
Yes. Yeah. Right.
So, does there arise a tendency of, stringent epistemologies or stringent paradigms of knowledge, categories, which lose their connectivity? There are several strands of feminism, like socialist feminism, psychoanalytic feminism, ecofeminism. So these are different strands of knowledge systems themselves. So while we're dealing with them, does there arise stringent categorizations of knowledge systems which lose out their connectivity or connectedness?
So are you trying to say that an attempt to operate in silos can actually be very counterproductive?
Yeah.
Is that what you're trying to suggest?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And I couldn't agree more with you. This way of bracketing off and saying that I know this, so I will not move into this, can be can be very disastrous for academia. I think we need an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary thrust, whether it is across domains or within a domain. Right? So this stringent way of looking at it, I think, is problematic for academics. Right?
Okay.
We really need to loosen ourselves up on that.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a question by Ms. Jaya Nair, ma'am. Could you please unmute yourself? And could all participants please introduce themselves before they ask the question?
Okay. we can move on to next. Sharon Thomboji, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening. My name is Sharon. I'm doing a PhD at Bangalore University, and I am researching cyber crimes against women, and I'm doing a comparative study with my home country in South Africa and with the women here in India. I just wanted to know, how does feminist epistemology challenge traditional knowledge structures? Or if it does?
Okay, which is what I was trying to say in my presentation. It challenges by talking about how knowledge is situated. It challenges the idea of objectivity. It challenges the idea of disembodied knowledge, right? And these are, it talks about experience, how experience matters a lot. You know, it talks about ways of knowing. There is one way of knowing which is located in the body, and there's one way of knowing which passes by you. And it emphasizes also, and what we've always known is that knowledge, you know, one way of knowing that passes by us and not located in our body. And feminist epistemologies are talking about that, which becomes very important. If that answers your question.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, you were giving a quote, and I'm not sure if it was by Sarah somebody, but it was really nice, and I missed most of it, but it was talking about standpoint theory, but it was one very distinctive line that you've used. And I guess I have to go back to the recording when we get it, but I think it was, I'm not sure whether you quoted Sarah Harding. I don't know.
Sandra Harding.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't quite. What was it about? What was it about?
You were talking about ethics of care and the emotions and empathy, and then you went on to give like a very distinctive quote. I remember it, but I don't remember it.
I'll have to check up also, because when you're talking, you talk about many things, but you don't remember.
I guess we look at the recording. Okay, thank you, ma'am.
We're getting video, and she has also shared the readings. So in that also it will be there, but the video will be shared with you. So there are many more questions. Yes.
Batul.
Batul.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, good evening, I guess. I'm Batul Shafiq, and I am a student at the BITS Law School. And so my question is that when we look at the comments and the theories proposed by a lot of male theorists, of course, that you've already mentioned in your slides and in your lecture, and when we look at their opinions on women and what they have said about women and their bodies, and looked at women from a very singular point of view, should we, or does it negate their whole argument? Or does it, reduce the validity of the arguments that they propose in general, because they have a singular point of view about a very large segment of the society? That's my first question. I have another, so if you could answer this, I would like to propose my second question after, if that's okay.
I think it's very important to mount a challenge to those ways of knowing which marginalize women, no? Not just women, they marginalize a whole lot of people and their processes of understanding the world, right? When you privilege one single way of knowing the world, or social relations and society, it is problematic, because then you seem to think that you know about everybody when we don't. We don't. Right? So it's very important to hear it from the people who have experienced certain things. I think their perspective will be far more richer than us, who have not gone through the experience. Right? That's why we say that perhaps men can be our allies, but the question of whether men can be feminist has arisen so many times, right? Can they be feminists? Right? So so, you know, the received wisdom as students, I mean, as a teacher, I tell my students, the received wisdom has to be interrogated. If it doesn't sit well with your own experiences, I mean, why do I go to a university space? I mean, education is also a lot about transformation, as Dr. Patel pointed out, and feminism is about praxis. It is about transformation. It is about interrogation. We do all this in the quest of a better world and just world, and therefore it's important. Interrogation is important. You take those aspects. For example, the standpoint theory also comes from Marxism. In fact, Nancy Hartstock, she takes a lot from Marx when he said that the the standpoint of the proletariat is important. It's important to understand the world through their eyes, through that lens. Right? So we do take aspects of the canon. The canon is pretty gendered, we know that. But we do take aspects of the canon which appeal to us and we question the others. Right? I mean, see, it's so difficult. I mean, this is how it also, feminism is also a lot about the personal, no? So I'm a teacher of sociology, and when I teach Auguste Comte, I'm teaching a person who devalued women. Like, I can't even tell you.
Right.
He said women have their space is only at home. They exist only to bring about the social stability. They cannot work. And he's a founder of the subject, and I'm supposed to be teaching him. Right? Obviously, the interrogation has to happen, no?
Right.
Right?
So,
In
ma'am,
that sense.
moving on to my second question, which which stems from the first is, so you've also talked about social location and social location in, the gaining of knowledge. So when we talk about people who come from different social locations, right, there can be instances where the researcher is from a different social location as the people that he or she would want to research about, right? Like, let's say somebody from not somebody who's economically better would want to research the economically not so privileged. So does the social location and its difference lead to the knowledge being distorted?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It interferes. It interferes. And therefore, as a researcher, we need to be conscious of it. We need to be conscious of the privileges we carry with us to the field. Does that mean we should not do research? No. It means that we need to be conscious of the ways in which our privileges might interfere with the research process. Right? And you acknowledge it. You acknowledge it when you write your thesis or your project or whatever it is. It's very, very important. So imagine a male researcher. Can a male researcher research on veiling, interview women who are veiled? It's very difficult.
Right.
Right? So women have veiled. They don't want to see, and you think the truth will come out. You think what they actually feel on veiling will come out. It won't. So the social
Right.
location matters immensely, and we train our students accordingly. But I mean, 20, 30 years ago, we didn't talk about it much. You were just a researcher. You learned about principles of research. Nobody told you about social location, right? But that's very important. It's paramount.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am.
Niharika ji, could you please ask your question now?
Thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes.
Good evening, esteemed panelists. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity to learn so much about feminism. I am a PhD scholar from Pandit Deen Dayal Energy University, Gandhinagar, Gujarat. And my question was basically, I am researching on Gulzar's films, and I'm trying to study the female characters in his films using the framework of feminist film theory. And I'm also using semiotic analysis to study all these female characters. Can you please give me any words of advice on how should I make sure that I can utilize the feminist framework properly so that I can analyze the female characters better and actually get to the goal that I thought of before starting the study?
So I think I can convincingly answer your question only if I understand certain things. So my question is, what led you to this? I mean, why would you want to look at it? What triggered off this interest in the subject matter?
Ma'am, I had actually studied about feminist film theory in graduation as well as post-graduation. So we had this one small topic called feminist studies or feminist film theory, and I did not understand much. We just studied enough to pass the exam, probably. And then later on, I just felt that there's more to it. This probably I just studied a couple of authors, maybe Laura Mulvey, maybe Bell Hooks, one or two, but I felt there was more to it. And later on, when of course, when I opened it up, it was a Pandora box. There were so many things to know and learn. But then it also helped me understand myself better as a woman and as my place in society and what I'm supposed to do. And there's so many problems in filmmaking. And because a lot of the feminist accounts say that films are a very, very important and very influential mediums of communication.
Yeah. So, you know,
So,
you're correct. So I think you'll have to start with a lot of reading, I mean, feminist texts and readings. And I would suggest one more thing. You need to also read and understand and maybe follow Paramita Vora. She's very good when it comes to a feminist analysis of films. She has her website, Agents of Fish. So you will get a very fine and nuanced understanding of how we look at women in films.
Yes,
That's
Also,
something that yeah.
Prabha
and Dr.
Krishnan
Patel.
and Vimal Balasubramaniam.
Yes.
Of the
Rama
films
Krishnan?
of the 80s, 70s, 80s, I think Prabha Krishnan has done a lot of work on media analysis. And other one is this one, Vimal Balasubramaniam, Mirror Image, her book is called Mirror Image. That is also, yeah, feminist methodology she has used for analyzing Hindi films.
Characters, women characters in
Women
films.
characters.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was really helpful.
Can we please have Bernadette G ask her question?
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible to everybody?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Good evening, ma'am. I just wanted you to, ma'am, Leena, ma'am, to, as briefly as possible, talk about bifurcated consciousness. You mentioned about this. So does it have anything to do with the multiple roles played by a woman?
It comes from this position of I think it stems from this whole public-private dichotomy that we have, right? Where we are told that your workplace is different from your home and there can be no intermeshing. And especially the workplace needs to be free from everything that happens at home, emotions, anxieties, troubles, etc. You know, and it stems from there. So Dorothy Smith talks about bifurcated consciousness, and she says, it seems as though I'm conscious of the two different worlds that I occupy. And she says, I think I could be a better teacher, a better academic if my workspace could accommodate my concerns that emanate from my role within the home, right? It comes from there. And not being able to do it, one feels, she says, I feel as though it's a very fractured identity. And she says very clearly, I don't feel I belong there. It's as though I'm in like what Patricia Hill Collins says, an outsider within. Right? You are inside, but you're still an outsider because you don't seem to fit into their way of doing work or understanding the world. And you look at them from like an outsider. And she says everything there, that academia is full of men writing about men, talking about men, and doing sociology for men. Right? So that becomes that's what she says.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, ma'am. I'm sorry I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Bernadette, who is a research scholar with Geetham University, working on my thesis called Remapping Female Identity in Context of Shobhan Bantwal's novels.
All right.
Thank you, ma'am.
Lovely knowing that.
Jagat Ji, could you please ask your question?
Yeah.
Good evening, ma'am. Ma'am, my question was, ma'am, you mentioned about the ethics of care, which are crucial in researching respondents. So I have a question about, it is generally like, it's traditionally the association, there is an association of care and empathy linked to women. So how does feminism address this aspect in research?
Feminist research, in fact, emphasizes on the principles of care and empathy,
Yes,
not empathy. Yes. In fact, when feminists do research and when we go to the field, we identify with the respondent. We don't maintain a distance. There's a sense of familiarity and there's a reassurance. We understand what we are saying because maybe at some point of time we've gone through it. So that kind of identification comes from this, from instituting principles of care and empathy. I think it's very important. We can't look at the respondent object, as an instrumental for gaining information, right? We have to understand how we are impacting them and we take their time and we gain out of it. How are they gaining out of it? These are questions that we need to ask.
Yes, ma'am.
Right?
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, lastly, there are a few questions on the resources on feminist.
There is one question which I would like to answer. I see that in the Q&A and she says that, is feminism only about women and not other genders? Certainly not. Feminism is about everybody, all oppressed groups. It is intersectional feminism. Feminism is not just about women. It began by talking about only women, and men were kept out of it, but there was a certain context in which it happened. So which is why, you know, the context becomes so important. We don't understand the context in which that happened, and till date we continue thinking that feminism is anti-men. It is not. It is about all genders. And I would go further and say it is about all oppressed groups. We build there is alliance. We build alliances with all marginalized groups.
Thank you, ma'am. So lastly, there are a few questions in chat about resources on feminist epistemology, particularly in relation to law and policy. So if you could just mention those.
So you can, for law, Pratiksha Bakshi, I can't see the question, so I'm just kind of telling you for law, Pratiksha, what in law I don't know, but if it's about feminist jurisprudence, please look at the works of Pratiksha Bakshi. You can look at the work of Kalpana Kannibaran. You can also see the Srimati Basu, if it is about property rights. Flavia Agnes, Saumya Uma, she has a session. Flavia Agnes. These are absolutely wonderful pieces of work by all of them.
They are in public domain, easily accessible.
Yes, easily accessible.
Yeah, free from password. You can download them.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Your session was truly enlightening. Now, I'll be delighted to call upon Dr. Linda Lane for an address or intersectional perspective on feminism. We welcome you, ma'am. Over to you.
Hi, good evening. I'm Archana. May I ask one question?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I did get the pop-up to ask, but at that time I was not in a position to ask. May I ask now?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
So I've just put one question there in the chat as well, and I just wanted to understand from Professor Vibhuti Patel, ma'am, and dignified panel, that are there any studies on speciality, marginalization, and what kind of feminist epistemologies are there existing currently to deal with these questions? And is there any theoretical linkages which have been studied between these? If yes, then would like to get some reference for that. And if there are any empirical questions to be investigated for the linkages between speciality, marginalization, and applying the feminist methodology, please do suggest, ma'am. The second question is, which comes to my mind, is about the marginalization. Any kind of marginalization is about the perception and experiences. So how does feminist research define marginalization, and which theoretical propositions are there or which can be looked at and be understood? Are there multiple definitions regarding marginalization? And how does one come to a definition which can be applied more or less in a particular context, Indian context, for instance?
I think to say that marginalization is located in perception and experience, I think that is too limited a way of looking at it. Marginalization is situated in the material reality. What is the social positioning, which class, caste, ethnicity, religion, geographic location, language group you belong to? That determines your bargaining power, your positioning within the power relations, no? So it is also material reality. That material reality determines your perception, your self-concept, your experiences, no? So it's both the lived experience, that is why we call it lived experience, that under
right.
Yeah. So
it's about the space which you mentioned, the social space,
yeah,
power relations, and when we say perceptions, how would we actually?
Perception is an outcome of, because perception
of
comes
these
when you have a
experiences.
lived experience. Yeah.
Okay.
That comes from.
Yeah. And what about speciality and all? Is there any connection, any theoretical studies on this, ma'am?
Special needs group. Especially
yeah.
most of the studies in the feminism, they have focused on those who have been marginalized, no? Marginalized due to caste or class or ethnicity or race or economic, post-coloniality. So most of the feminist studies, whether you talk about, say, transnational feminist solidarity or the post-colonial feminism, all of them have done, and that contribution among post-colonial feminists, many Indian feminists have contributed to that, no?
The post-colonial
Chandra
speciality, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so post-colonialism also takes care of the colonial, those countries which were colonized.
Yes, ma'am. But what about the
Years.
local and the intra? The local and the local access, how do we look at it? Or
yeah, so when it comes to, say, Chandra Talapade Mohanty's work, if you see, it is about post-colonial feminism. Dalit feminists have written extensively, like Cynthia Striffen. She has written about Dalit feminism, or the works of a person like Sharmila Rege. She has extensively written,
right.
As a sociologist. And among economists, you can say a person like Nirbala Banerjee for economics, Maitreyi Krishna Raj, Neera Desai, they have written. Among political theorists and political scientists, also a lot of work has happened in terms of women's participation in public life. So women in modern India. When Neera Desai also talks about it, women freedom fighters have written, like Dakshayani Velayathan's writings, where she was
even Kumud Pavade and
Urmila Pawar.
These are very important.
They have written this. All of them are easily available. Yeah.
All right, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We hope to see you again at future IMPRI sessions. Your insights were truly captivating, and thank you for sharing your.
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you, ma'am. Professor Linda Leena, I would like to give the stage over to you. We welcome you, ma'am.
Oh, thank you very much. Am I audible now to everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It is indeed a pleasure to be here. I'm at this point sitting in Delhi, and I'm rather cold because I didn't expect it to be so chilly. But yeah, you know, one learns along the way.
Yeah.
And I would like to thank specifically IMPRI for inviting me, and for Professor Patel for organizing these workshops. As Leena Pujari said, this is the third year, and it feels like we are kind of getting into a good position now to go forward and do some good work. We're laying a good foundation here. So with that said, I would like to share my screen with you, if that's okay, see if we can make that work. Just one moment. So today I'm going to talk about feminism, theory and practice, a variety of feminism, and gender-based violence and intersectional perspective. Now, of course, this is in this half an hour or 40 minutes, I won't be able to answer all of the questions. But my point here is to try to give an introduction to the subject and make it possible for students or listeners, to learners to go forward. The aim of this short lecture is to present a variety of feminist theories, building on the lecture that you've just heard, that there are a multitude of feminisms out there. And to briefly present how to perform an intersectional analysis, because many of the students that we meet in our classrooms or when we have these kinds of workshops, it kind of turns out that they have an idea about what intersectionality can be. They've read the text, they understand the theories, kind of. But how do we do it? How can we make an intersectional analysis? So I'm going to give a few points about that in this lecture. And then I want to discuss the added value of an intersectionality perspective when addressing gender-based violence. And I'm saying gender-based values here, but I'm taking that from the radical feminist perspective, but with that, I mean sexual violence of all kinds. And the idea is that we are talking about both theory and practice. So I'm going to give some theories, and then I'm going to try to apply that in a practical way with a few examples. And we'll see where we end up in the end. So, feminism, what are we talking about? And of course, Dr. Pujari gave a very good definition. I'm going to complicate it by adding a couple of more of these. The first one is from Delaney from 2005. And she talks about feminism as being a woman-based socio-political movement and ideology. We are not just about theoretical or theorizing about what should happen. It is also about activism. It's about being involved. It's about getting social movements going that are going to actually work forward or move forward towards getting women to be to have this kind of shared equality in all of society's opportunities, as well as society's scarce resources. So we're talking about economics here as well, not just theory. Mira Fiore from 2006, her definition has been taken up by the Oxford Dictionary. And she talks about the fact that feminism is about the belief and the aim that women should have the same rights and opportunities as men, the struggle to achieve the same. Now, if you think about Fiore's definition, you could probably say that she's a bit of, she's still a bit in this kind of liberal feminist mode, where opportunity is the most often put forward way of achieving equality. We talk about if everyone has the same equality, the opportunities, then of course we'll have some kind of equality sometimes in the future. The point is, everyone does not start off with the same opportunities. We all are part of, as Dr. Pujari spoke about in her lecture. She talks about the fact we come from different positions in society. We have different, different locations, different time frames. All of these things play an important role. And of course, just by mentioning opportunity, you will not automatically get to equality. Now, there are a variety of feminisms, and they have been diversity that has been developed and that has evolved over time. And the idea is to kind of, again, as Dr. Pujari talked about, it has been a response to sexism, to the violation of women's rights all along. We've been trying to find ways to kind of intricately discuss, find out, tease out ways of understanding, ways of knowing based on our own experiences or experiences of our parents, our families, our group, our race, our caste, our social level in society. All of these things have impacted on the way we develop different ways of speaking and seeing and understanding what feminism is. However, and as I think this is very crucial when we talk about varieties of feminism, any one feminist may, and that I mean myself included, may include or incorporate ideas from several feminist perspectives. And many feminists have shifted their perspective over the years. My own personal view, I started as a Marxist socialist, class interested social, feminist. That was where I had my point of departure. For me, everything was, it's capitalism that was the foundation for the subjugation and the underordning of women. And this kind of moved forward as I got more involved with my research to kind of radical feminism, where I took a more maybe concentrated view around patriarchy and the way it functions, and tried really to incorporate this kind of view of patriarchy from my understandings of Marxist socialist feminism into a kind of radical perspective. And that worked out for a while. And now, I've kind of moved over to a more understanding of feminism from a intersectionality perspective based on Black feminism, with a few overtones, if you will, of social constructionism. So it's kind of an understanding that, you know, all of these inequalities that we are experiencing in society, they're not just there. They didn't just appear. They are constructions based on specific spaces and time. And they're also the realities for different groups who may be in the same place, but are in different positions in different times and spaces. So my point is here, and I think we're not just one thing. We're not just one thing. If you're a feminist, you maybe have lots of other ideas that you take a little bit here and there, and you make it so that it completes your understanding of the problem or the research you want to do. So for students out there who are kind of, you know, listening to the questions previously, just be open. You don't have to make a decision that I am this one kind of feminist. You should, as a student, you should be open to lots of different ways of thinking and knowing and seeing and being involved with your research questions. So the important thing I think I want to say here is that at the core of all forms of feminism is the struggle for equality. So there are a lot of roads leading there, but this is the core idea behind feminism. Now, I think also at this point, it would be very important for me to kind of, as a researcher and as a speaker here in this panel, to say something about my own position, not only as a feminist, but also the fact that I am not only a feminist, but I am a Western feminist. I take my point of departure in, you know, a Western Eurocentric perspective. Most of my research has been done in a, you know, Eurocentric way. I'm located in Sweden. And of course, this impacts my view of who I am when I speak to you. So, and I think that is very important that I kind of make clear here. I'm not, I don't know enough about the Indian context to say that I have any kind of expertise in that area. What I can say as a Black person with my history of Blackness, my skin color, my academic background in a Western view, again, it is, you know, of course, this plays a role. That means I am, if I look at myself as an academic, I have lots of kinds of intersections in myself when I talk to you. So I'm coming to you today as a Black Western academic trying to talk to you about my understanding of intersectionality. And of course, it's up to you how you accept it and how you maybe decide to go forward, to read more, to understand more, and then to take these ideas and make them your own. They become a part of your own experience and not just mine. So, as I said before, I was going to talk about various forms of feminism, but we can't speak about all of them. And in this limited time, I mean, at this point, I think the Western liberal feminism with the kind of opportunities, equal opportunities between men and women, that has kind of become the basis for our points of departure. So most of us have read that kind of literature, and we know these kind of first wave feminists, maybe by heart. On the other hand, I think it is important to acknowledge them, to note that they were there because they were important in the sense that they made visible the inequalities that existed between men and women. And, you know, we can say what we want about their limitations, but I think, again, it was very important. And of course, with hindsight, we say, okay, they were only talking about men and women as if there are only two genders. And nowadays we are much more open. We know that this is not the case, that there is, if we want to talk about Judith Butler, we know that this sexuality is a continuum. There are all possibilities out there. So while, of course, we still talk about men and women, that is just a starting point. It is not the end of the conversation. Now, Marxist socialist feminism, of course, as I said, that was my point of departure when I was a young academic just starting out. And it was more about this view of capitalist economy system where, these global power positions made it very, it's difficult for women to have a place in society. Now, of course, as I matured as a researcher, I learned that this was not simply about Marx in the old school way of thinking. Marx is really kind of important to the way we think about what we do today, because even if we don't want to talk about class anymore, and I'm finding that is much more the case in the Western, Eurocentric view, nobody talks about economic class. Now we are all middle-class people now, if we listen to the politicians. But the point is, how did we get there? And I think Marx has a point, and Engels, together they made a very good working pair. And they talked about the double burden of women. And, how, a part of their criticism was this kind of the criticism of the family as a source of women's oppression and exploitation. And for me, that was very central when I was writing my thesis back in the day. And of course, they argue that so-called, welfare states, Sweden of which is a very prominent one, can be just as paternalistic. Of course, Marx didn't know about Sweden back then, but when we look at what we are talking about today in terms of this Marxist socialist view of feminism, we see that welfare states can be as paternalistic as others. Of course, the basic idea was that with the welfare state, we would lose this kind of paternalistic view. My colleague and I, we wrote an article a couple of years ago where we actually tried to tease out this. What does it mean when you say welfare state? Are welfare states equal? Are they equal for men and women? And we were forced to acknowledge that they are not. And even so, when we look at it from an intersectionality perspective, that is not only women, but women of color, men and women with disability or other forms of marginalization, what is the role of the welfare state here? And we can see, and as I tried to explain in this example, that when the economy needs workers, the state pays for childcare and childcare leave and all of the good benefits that accrue to members of welfare societies like welfare states like Sweden. But when the economy turns down, the state reduces the benefits. Now they can do this because the government is dominated by males and they have an interest of making sure that women remain a kind of reserved body of labor. And it just goes to show when the state needs women to have children, then of course they provide lots of, childcare, daycare, all of the things that make it possible for women to work. But when it wants women to have more children, then it turns down or it cuts back on access to abortions and contraceptives, but also to all of these other benefits that usually accrue to women doing welfare. Now, of course, a class perspective alone is not going to, it won't give us all evidence. But I think it is very important that we continue to think about class as a very important component when we look at feminism in general. So over to radical feminism, which, as I said previously, I started out as a Marxist socialist feminist, and I went over to incorporating more radical feminism when I started looking at maybe taking a view away from class, but looking at patriarchy and sexism. and trying to look at the ways that these two cross-cut to, across categories, some race and age and culture, class, caste. And they are asking the question of what lies behind women's subjugation, not only in a Western context, but in India and Africa and other parts of the world. What is it that is the least common denominator here? It also started to, I started to kind of want to understand these kind of micro inequalities of everyday life, of being a woman in a situation where you can never be sure that you are not going to be subjugated to sexual harassment, that people are not going to listen to you simply because you're a woman, that you will be overlooked if you're in a situation, we all know from research that in a meeting, men talk and women have very little possibilities to speak. You have to challenge meetings, and in organizations for women to have their voices heard. This kind of feeling of being insecure all the time, that we start to actually limit ourselves. We don't go to the movies because it might be dark and we are afraid that we will be sexually assaulted on the street, or maybe we be, about inappropriate touching, all of these things. And what radical feminism does is it brings to the fore the belief that men see women as their inferior, that we are not only different, but we are inferior. And it is deeply embedded in men's consciousness that, women are there for their use. Radical feminism also brought up the fact that the threat of violence and rape is the way that patriarchy controls all women. And that's not just in a European context, but it is around the world. For example, the belief that most men have the potential to use physical violence against women, including rape and murder, arguments that have been essential to research in gender-based violence or in, sexual violence. But I want to point out here, and it's important to say that not all men are violent, but statistics do show that men's violence against women is higher than in the reverse. So just kind of keep that in mind. So to move on now in my progression through my feminist journey, Black feminism and intersectionality. The question was raised by one of in the audience to Dr. Pujari, how can we be more incorporative of various forms, of feminism, and how do they kind of interact with each other? Now, for me, intersectionality does not replace another form of intersectionality of feminism. It provides more. It gives me more of a view, a deeper understanding of the research questions that I want to ask. So, Black feminism and intersectionality argues that sexism, class oppression, gender identity, and racism are inextricably bound together. That these concepts relate to each other, and in this way, and this is the way we call intersectionality. That cultural patterns of oppression are not only interrelated, but they are bound together and influenced by society's intersectional systems, such as race, gender, class, and ethnicity. So we are saying, these are systemic categories, and that they are constructed over time. So this is where we kind of get this kind of social constructionism coming in as well. As a formal legal concept, intersectionality emerged in the 1980s, and I think most of the students may have heard of Kimberly Crenshaw. And she used the term to capture the inadequacy of legal frameworks to address inequality and discrimination. Of course, her two categories in the beginning were just race and gender, and looking back to see how they were intersected to shape Black women's employment experiences in the United States. So it has to be very clear here that her initial work was done in America. Of course, since then, intersectionality has traveled to Europe, and I mean, everywhere. Everybody talks about doing an intersectionality analysis. Everybody wants to talk about intersectionality. But I think we need a deeper understanding of what it actually is. So to kind of conceptualize it in 5 easy steps, we can say that every person has multiple identities. You know, we have a gender, we have an ethnicity, we have a sexual orientation, we have a gender identity, we have a social and economic class, we have an ability or lack of ability, we have a religion, we have age, all of these things, and many, many more. So intersectionality is the way in which these multiple identities interact with and complicate each other to affect each individual's experience. So my experience as a Black woman living in Sweden in the academy, coming to you as such to speak to you and an Indian audience, of course, would be very much different from Professor Patel's position or Dr. Pujari's position. Their, intersexual identities are different. No one can be defined by only one of their identities. We are many things, we are not, in Sweden, there's a popular commercial that goes from it's one of those terrible ones that everybody hates. It's a very nice looking blonde lady in a white coat. And of course, in the white coat, it has a medical example on it. And she says, "I'm not just a dentist, I'm also a mother," as she tries to sell us toothpaste. So, even in commercials, the idea of being more complex is there. It's around us all the time. Thus, intersectionality as a perspective to understand how a person, group of people, a social problem is affected by a number of discrimination and injustice factors. It takes into account people's overlapping identities and experiences to understand the complexity of prejudice they face. An intersectionality perspective asserts that a people are often disadvantaged by these sources of multiple sources of oppression simultaneously. And this was with the point of Kimberly Crenshaw's lecture, that you can't undo race from class. That was her basic. You can't say, this little part of me over here is about race, and this other little part over here is about class, or about gender, or something else. You have to take all of me, that's the way it is when you talk about this. So, why do we need an intersectionality perspective? Now, on the right-hand side, I think I have a little diagram there, and it talks about various forms of multiple intersecting forms of oppression. And we have ableism, ageism, racism, colonialism, class discrimination, etc. All of these things are there. And so why do we need an intersectional perspective? Yes, because it allows us to understand how inequality between gender and other forms of inequality work together. And not only when they work together, they shape the experiences of women, in this case, as I'm going to be speaking about, of violence. As a result of these intersections, women experience discrimination and oppression differently across space and time. And that is repeating what I've said previously, that some groups are more likely to experience various forms of violence, in this case, sexual violence, than others. And this is, of course, because some groups are privileged in some ways and others are privileged in others. Now, all groups are not always privileged in all things. Some groups are privileged more in, depending on the context. And we usually talk about in the Western context that white women generally are more underordered men, but they are more privileged than women of color or marginalized groups. But move that white woman to another place, say to Nigeria or to Bangladesh, and then you have a completely different perspective about privilege here. Who's privileged where and when? An intersectionality perspective allows us to gain view of the problems and of the problem that we want to address, and can therefore help us to make plans or to strategize intersectionally. That is, we don't make a strategy or an intervention for my race or for women alone. We try to construct ways of moving forward, a movement that is going to incorporate all of me at the same time. I'm not going to have to, give up one part of my identity in order to be a part of moving forward. So, practice. Now, this workshop is about focusing on theory, but we need to understand a bit more about, how do we put this into practice? And in the next couple of slides, I'm going to try to say something about that and try to say something about why working, what kind of attitude, do I need to have when I'm going to work intersectionally. And of course, we are back to Dr. Pujari's discussion about epistemology and methodology. So here's my little take on that. But, if you're going to do an intersectional analysis, it emphasizes the inclusion of all voices, especially of oppressed voices. And I see that I've kind of written that twice. You can just take away the second sentence. The consequence of that, the most difficult aspect of applying an intersectional perspective is delimiting the scope. That is, we have to make some decisions about which identity structures should be included in the analysis and why we want to include them. We can't do everything. So an intersectional analysis aims to uncover historical and structural mechanisms of dominance. What culture, economic, legal, political forces created the current manifestations of oppression? So you can't just start at the present. You have to take a step back to look at, where did this come from? Who was there? What were the conditions? What structural mechanisms reproduce and maintain this? You take a step back to see what is the historical relationship, but then you have to see, moving forward, what is it about the power structures in our societies that maintain and reproduce the same thing over and over again? So with an intersectional analysis, the goal is not to create a value-neutral contribution. And we're back to the discussion from Dr. Pujari here. We are not out to, to find a truth. We are trying to make critical proposals for social change. When you adopt an intersectional perspective, you are being political. So just know that up front. So when you make intersectional analysis, you must choose. You can't do everything all ways at the same time. And this is, of course, has been confusing for students, and not only students, but other researchers who are saying that, well, I can't do it's too many intersections. Everything is kind of going together. I don't understand. Which one should I do? Why should I do that? Well, as in any kind of research, it is your research question that is going to point you in the right direction. So you need to make your point of departure in your research question. And from that, I'm going to just point out 3 proposals for decisions that is going to kind of define the scope of your study or your research or your strategy. 1, which identity structures have been overlooked, under-theorized in the relevant literature? So again, you're taking a standpoint, if you will, to understand what has not been talked about, who has been left out. And then, of course, there you're entering to the relationship of the marginalized. Yeah. Which identity structures seem most consequential to the chosen context? So what is it that I really want to talk about and is going to be most important from helping me to understand the context that I want to explore? And for the third, which identity structures do the participants prefer to reveal or hide? Now, again, we are back in Dr. Pujari's lecture about who can talk to who can do research on whom, when, and why. The people, the individuals, the groups that you are researching, their voices must be heard. And you have to enter this kind of relationship with them, understanding that they have choices too. They are not powerless. Their power is to tell you what they think you want to hear, or to reveal as much or as little about themselves as they prefer. So in the end, then depending on the goals of your project, you can focus on a single oppressed group, or you can compare theoretical appropriate groups or both. So once you kind of, from the previous slide, when you've kind of decided what kind of identities groups you want to research, you take the 3 rules as a way of, starting your analysis, and then you can make some decisions. But always, you need to make a choice. You can't do everything at the same time. And I think this has been kind of the problem for students of trying to do research in this area, because they feel that, oh, if it's intersectionality, then I must take all of the intersections at the same time. You don't. It is your research questions that are going to make the decisions for you. So to say something about this as regards sexual violence, again, intersectionality, it helps us to understand a bit more about sexual violence. People of all genders can perpetrate or be subject to sexual violence. It's not just women, and that's very important that we make clear for us. Viewing sexual violence through a gender lens, if we just look at it through gender without taking into consideration this intersectionality, perspective, it allows us to see patterns that help us address its root causes. More specifically, the majority of people, as I said before, who commit sexual violence are men, and the majority of women who experience it are women. But that's as far as a gender alone analysis would get us. It helps us see who does what to whom. So I have a little quote here from Katz Jackson. She said, Jackson Katz, she says, precisely because the mistreatment of women is such a pervasive characteristic of our culture, most men, to a greater or lesser extent, have played a role in its perpetuation. And this gives us a strong incentive to avert our eyes. That is, even men who are not violent, maybe they don't call out men who are violent. They just let it go, yeah? So if we try to address the same thing by looking at it through an intersectionality lens, and again, you have to go back to looking at how you make the analysis, how you want to do it, you find that, first of all, we understand, okay, and I see here that I'm expecting you to understand Swedish, but you don't, so I will do it in English. But the idea is that sexual violence becomes much more clear. And that means that the reality of the people living at the intersections of violence, many of whom are marginalized identities, that the likelihood of them experiencing violence is greater. When we use an intersectionality lens, we also can understand many of those things that mean that women are people who are subjected to violence, why they cannot seek and get help. And this has to do with the fact that if you're a marginalized person in relation to the power structure, the class structure of different forms, based on your intersexual identities. The farther you're down on this kind of intersectionality ladder, the less likely you are to get help and assistance when you need it. They also kind of, help us understand why the law alone will not save us. Because the law, like other policy-making instruments, is often the judiciary, until recently, has been dominated by men. So they make laws that are relevant for men, they protect men, women come second, especially in relation to gender violence. So some conclusions, and I say sort of, because, I think one of the questions from the previous section was, how do various, feminisms relate to different perspectives, etc. Well, depending on the feminist perspective you choose, and whether or not you want to integrate it with an intersectionality perspective, you will have a different outcome because you're looking at it from a different way. And of course, your research question, if you're a researcher, will of course have a very important part of it. So I just make the statement here that a gender analysis is necessary, but it isn't sufficient to take into account all of the structural inequalities, discrimination factors that contribute to injustices and violations in the lives of different women. Secondly, gender-based violence or sexual violence does not affect all women equally. And that is just this is the point that intersectionality helps us to see. Individual women and social structures are affected in particular ways by the intersections between oppression on the one hand and circumstance around aspects of their identity. Experiences and meanings of violations are mediated and exacerbated through categories of discrimination, inequality, including categories of racism, poverty, ageism, cultural imperialism, disability, etc. An intersectionality perspective makes it possible to represent and address particular needs arising from these different categories, identities that make up the whole of real lives. So the idea with, is that we don't pick up one particular aspect, we try to see the whole picture or the whole woman or the whole person who is being, in this case, sexually violated. So I'm going to say thank you, but I'm going to do that by showing you a picture of my house goddess, Audre Lorde. In this picture, she writes, "Women are powerful and dangerous." And I agree with her. But she also says, and I think this is important, especially when we talk about intersectionality, when we talk about the fact that, oh, it's so difficult and we are so, we got all of these identities and you're over here and we're over here and we don't talk about the same thing. And what she does in this quotation that I'm going to read now from 1979, she says, "As women, we have been taught to either ignore our differences or to see them as causes of separation and suspicion, rather than as forces to change." That is, society wants us to keep talking about how we're different. It wants us to keep talking about what we don't agree on instead of seeing what we do agree on. And she continues by saying, "Those of us who stand outside the circle of this society's definition of acceptable women know that survival is not an academic skill. It's just learning how to take our differences and turn them to strengths. For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." So with that, I'll just say thank you for listening. And I have a few references, and they're all Western. But if there's, I think my colleagues here in India will have plenty of references for you. These are some seminal texts that I think if you're interested in Black feminism specifically, or various varieties of feminism in general, and sexual violence, they may be helpful for you. So with that, I'll just say thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Vibhuti, ma'am, I would now like to invite you for the chair's remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Linda Lane, for such an important presentation on intersectional perspective that explains and leads to pathway of combating interlocking oppression of racism, sexism, in our context, casteism, heteronormativity. But how do we demarginalize the intersection? I think that is all in our daily lives. I think you also gave so many examples. What types of affirmative actions need to be institutionalized to transform structures and systems through laws, policies, quotas, and bottom-up solidarities? I think that we need to identify in our own context. But my question is that when we talk about intersectionalism, I think there was a time, like in our younger days, like 40 years back, sisterhood is powerful slogan had been extremely appealing, whether it was a solidarity for Vietnam Revolution or the Black liberation struggle or the newly liberated countries from colonization. So I think in current context, what's the pathway you see for this kind of a solidarity within one's own context and also across the border, no? Yeah.
Well, I would like to be very optimistic, but unfortunately, I'm not at this point in time. And I think it's because I don't know a lot about the situation in India just now at the moment, but in Europe and especially in America, we are living under a backlash, extremely powerful backlash, where women, feminism is being challenged. And even as we develop new ways of thinking, new strategies for trying to find solidarity across borders, we are at the same time experiencing cutbacks in funding, not only in the economy, but also in social funding in society. Many of, kind of dominant or prominent European societies have very strong right-wing conservative parties who are questioning everything around women's forward movement. They're saying that women have, and groups, marginalized groups they've gotten too much. They've come too far. Now we have to protect men. We have to protect men from these aggressive women. I don't know if you've experienced the discussion around wokeism here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same, but of course, much stronger. These very conservative men often, but on the other hand, we are seeing some women who are involved in this, return to the household, feminist ideas of women as mothers and wives, and taking on this, very conservative roles. So, this kind of, on that hand, I think I'm kind of, and I'm not very optimistic. But on the other hand, and I have to say this because, I'm looking at it from a perspective, I've been around a while, and, you tend to become a bit jaded, and you don't think that things are going to change. But when you look at the young people today, I mean, they are using social media in a way that we never dreamed of. I mean, you're finding ways of joining hands across countries to discuss important issues. Of course, they are not always so inclusive of everyone, but I think this is the point that an intersectionality approach can assist us with, because it says that even if we cannot join hands across all of our multiple identities, we can agree around one or two central questions. I mean, right now there's a lot of discussion among younger people around the war in the Ukraine. There's a lot of discussion and a lot of, social media activity around questions of Israeli-Gaza situation. So maybe we're not, our old way of thinking is being questioned, but a new way is developing, but I think it's going to take time. And with the kind of backlash that we're experiencing, I think young people are going to have to find new ways of dealing with these kinds of reconstruction or of patriarchy in a way that perhaps we are not armed to deal with just now.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But I think it's a passing phase. I feel it's a passing phase because.
But everything is a passing phase.
Yeah.
You know, you know, as a historian, you know, in the end we all die. But you know, time changes, and we have to be optimistic about the fact that hopefully this is a phase.
Yeah.
And then, you know, things will happen again and we'll be back on track.
So meta narratives may be demoralizing, but there are so many micro narratives happening at a ground level. So
and those are the ones we need to encourage always.
They are energizing. Yeah, got it. There are several questions for you, 6 questions. Please go ahead, participants. Unmute and ask.
Yes, okay.
Can we start with Sharon ji, and can all participants again introduce themselves before they ask a question? Thank you.
Hi, good evening, Professor Lane. My name is Sharon. I understand that the whole frustration and everything when, you know, the way when we fight for feminism and women empowerment. And I often like to liken that patriarchy is like the fly in the kitchen, that no matter how much you shoo it away, it never goes away. And I feel that it's, and as you said, like, you know, with the younger generation and a new wave of researchers, especially in this digital realm, that we are finding new ways to fight, you know, from the marches on the street to the activism online. And most of the time, we don't even have to leave our homes, you know, to create an impact. But I mean, I'm new to this field, relatively new, but I'm already frustrated, you know. So for me, I just want to know, how can we ensure like a lasting impact in this ongoing fight against patriarchy, considering its persistent nature? I don't know, like what strategies will prove effective in dismantling this, you know, entrenched patriarchal structures over time, if we can, because I saw in your slide, you know, where you quoted so many other feminist writers, and so many people have done such great work before us. But like, when do we stop fighting, and will we ever stop fighting?
No, the simple answer is no. I mean, these small steps that we've won, they are being challenged all the time. So we cannot relax, not even for 1 minute. We have to keep the pressure on. And you know, as I just said, you know, we're experiencing a backlash now, but that doesn't mean, exactly as Professor Patel said, you know, we have to look at the mega narrative here. So, you know, no, there is not one specific strategy that I can think of that would, you know, that would resolve this issue. If it were so, then it would be gone, you know, it wouldn't exist. But this is the thing. I think we have to realize that the steps forward are incremental. They are so small, but it's like the drop of water on the stone. You just kind of keep eating away, you know, with new work, new people coming, new research, new social movements. And, you know, these are the ways that we can move forward. There is not one giant leap, I don't think, at this point. I mean, it would be lovely if that was the case, but I don't think it is. I'm sorry to disappoint you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now could Ramisha ji please ask a question? So she's asked.
Yeah. So my question was regarding standpoint feminism. So someone not being a Dalit, writing on Dalit, wouldn't be considered as a standpoint. So would that theory be, or would that writing be as relevant as someone who has a standpoint and who is a Dalit?
Okay, one more time. I think I missed part of your question because of the sound. Could you repeat it, please?
Actually, like my network is not that great here, so maybe
Yeah,
could someone help me with the question from the question?
Did you write it? Did you write it in the question and answer the Q&A?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Okay. Can write it. Okay, I'll read it. So, can writing on Dalit women experienced by someone who is not Dalit be considered a standpoint, as it will not be on one's experience of social position? Okay, and of course, this is the issue that Dr. Pujari also talked about. Now, I'm not a standpoint theorist, so unfortunately I can't give you an answer, but I can say from my experience as a Black person, and a lot of the frustrations that were experienced by Black people who were always subjugated to the white gaze and who were always being, especially in the American context in any case, where we were always researched by white, often male, and sometimes female researchers who told us what we knew or who told us what we thought or what we did. There was very little room for us to think. I mean, there was no place for our voices as Black people to be heard. And I can expect that might be the case for Dalit groups as well. Now, that doesn't mean that we can throw, that kind of research out the door, because it fills a function. It tells us as Black people and Dalits, maybe, that, okay, this is your experience of us, which is important because these people are writing from a position of privilege, which sometimes can be to our advantage in the fight, in the struggle to find, a place for ourselves. I mean, we cannot discount that, but we have to give counter narratives. And this is the point that I think Dr. Pujari was bringing, we have to say what we want and who we are. On the other hand, and I think it's very important, that coming from the margin, it means that it takes a long time for your voice to be heard because the majority is very powerful. And this is where you need to build social relationships around social movements or whatever, so that you can make your voice stronger in order to confront the privileged. And that is the case, I think it was the case of, Black feminists in America, because many of the white feminist movements, part of it in any case, actually captured Black, organization and tried to make it their own until, Black feminists said, no, that's not going to happen. We just backed off and, this is who we are. And of course, people like Patricia Hill Collins, Bell Hooks, and even earlier, I usually start talking about, in previous lectures about intersectionality historically from the 1850s, but you have to be persistent. So, can they speak about you? Yes, but that doesn't mean that is the final argument. That is just a starting point for you to continue to kind of push forward from your own position and your own experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
But in action, I think solidarity has to, when there is a Black Lives Matters movement, then you have to show your credential, that where do you stand, what side do you take, with whom are you?
Yeah. Definitely.
Dr. Mahinderpal Sandhu here from Punjab, India. So my question is that as you talk, the discrimination is a systematic process, and that systematic process is even imbued to our education system also. In India, we are implementing now NEP 2020, and even when I go through the things that we have to go back to the Indian knowledge systems, again there is to be a scary situation that once again women could be again at the margins. And when once a woman try to rebel, for example, if she's putting up with a narcissist person and trying to repair all the damages and losses, she's not able to, she quits from that situation, and then when she becomes independent, then also society is not ready to accept the women. She has to face social exclusion also at that time. So how we could control that, and make up with her emotions also.
Well, you know, there is no simple answer here again, but I mean, one of the important things I think you should notice, you know, I say, you know, as I said in my lecture, the law alone won't save us, but the law does. I mean, having laws against discrimination, having laws that says everybody should be included, having a law that says everybody has the same rights. I mean, it's aspirational, even if it is not a reality. And that, you know, you have to look at it like that, you know, to think, okay, discrimination occurs. It is, you know, everywhere. You can't get rid of it. Well, we haven't managed to get rid of it. But the fact that countries, nations are prepared to admit that there has been a systemic form of discrimination in our society and make laws that says this we will not tolerate. That is important. That is a very important basic step. Now, the fact that the law doesn't always get actualized in the way we would like it to be, that is to say that discrimination disappears. But even, you know, it is important to note that if I feel discrimination, I can go to the law. Will I get justice? Maybe, maybe not. But, you know, it's important to know that somewhere along the line, our country has said that we will not tolerate discrimination or, you know, inequality. So I like to, you know, in my most optimistic moments, I'd like to think that these kinds of laws are aspirational. It tells us the direction we want to go. It says that we are better. We want to be better people, and we don't want this to be a part of our everyday lives. Yeah. So you know, it's not going to change tomorrow, but again, you have to think about it. This is a long process.
Thank you, ma'am. Can we now have Aparna Lakshmi ji to ask a question, please?
Good evening, all panelists. Good evening, ma'am. Very elucidating and very empowering to hear from all of you. And I am actually a bilingual poet and a Google Women Techmakers Ambassador, also a cybercrime intervention officer. And I'm trying to understand it all. Of course, sociology has not been my subject, but social work has been. And we just touched upon all these subjects in social work. It's not a question, it's actually, I'm just wondering whether in our attempt to include all voices and to be more universal in our approach, are we again left with being majoritarianisms?
Marjorie, I didn't hear the last word.
Yes.
Majoritarianism. Where do we draw a line? To begin with.
But why do we have to draw a line? I mean, why do we need to draw a line? I think this is important. People, and I think this is what social media and this internationalization of social media has shown us. We don't. Why should we? Who's going to draw a line? Why should we draw a line? People who identify with the same issue or question will find their way to each other. They will not be the majority in the whole universe or in the whole of India or the whole of Sweden, but they will find like-minded people to which they can cooperate and find, you know, solace or support, which is important. So I don't think we have to, you know, people understand their own, they define their own degree of marginalization, if you so will. And they will find like-minded people who are prepared to maybe think likewise and maybe want to make some changes. This is where we get the growth of social movements, I think. You know, they come out of these small seeds of people understanding that we have questions we feel have not been raised before. And this is important to, you know, to intersectionality analysis, because, you know, it is these questions you need to ask: who has not been listened to, whose voices have not been heard? And they are the ones, you know, we can't identify them all. It's first when they emerge that we can be a part of the dialogue. Yeah.
Yes.
So I don't see that as a problem, but it may be my limited view at this point.
Thank you, ma'am. And when we listen to divergent voices which make us uncomfortable, and they compel us to think that we might be wrong. So is it, do you think it's a process of our own evolution? It helps in our own evolution?
I do. And I mean, when I teach my students, I try to tell them, be prepared to be uncomfortable. Because, you know, you cannot know everything about everyone, every time, in every place. What you need to bring with you is an ability or an interest in listening, hearing the other person. So, you know, and acknowledging, you know, that maybe, yeah, you have a point. Because we cannot shed our identities. You know, we are middle class, overclass, upper class, you know, all of these things are there. So we can't, you know, you don't have to fear them. I know a lot of my students, they talk about, oh, I'm so afraid to say this because I don't want to be called a racist, or I don't want to be called a this or that. But the deal is, in the classroom, where knowledge is supposed to be taking place, it has to be an atmosphere where sometimes somebody is going to be feeling uncomfortable. And then it's, from my perspective as a teacher, to try to, you know, tease out, what is it that you're feeling uncomfortable about? Is it, you know, why do you feel this way? Try to get these different views in at the same time, so that both the person who's feeling uncomfortable because they feel that, oh, I don't, you know, am I a racist now because of this? And the person who's feeling that maybe because of my marginalized situation, my voice isn't heard. That they can find some source, if you so will, of where they can start to communicate with each other. And I think that is my job as a teacher in the classroom, to try to kind of orchestrate these kinds of meetings. So yeah, be prepared to be uncomfortable.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank
You're
you so
welcome.
much.
Thank you, ma'am. Anvisha Bhattacharya ji, could you please ask your question?
Yes, ma'am, after hearing your shifts, like the shifts that you have taken from Marxist socialist feminism to radical feminism, then to an intersectional approach, it makes me quite curious to ask, like, whenever we're dealing with this intersectionalities and dealing with the so-called the women question, or the issue of women, it often happens that one of the factors or one of the intersections overpowers and kind of, you know, re-questions and reimagine, re-questions the very nuances of feminism. Like, say, suppose the basic concepts of the woman, or you know, the concepts that you use as sexuality and patriarchy, in a way that, you know, feminism, the basic roots of feminism also have to, like, you know, reconciliate you know, basic fundamentals. So in you know, and I'm talking about this process which happens in the praxis, and how does this, you know, feed into the theory building part of feminism, and you know, furthering its epistemologies. Like, if suppose culture or maybe caste, it produces newer understandings of what comprises the woman, or what is the condition of the woman, or how do we define the feminine, and which kind of, you know, gives rise to a reimagination of the basic concepts of feminism. You know, and how this thing in praxis feeds into theory, and later on, you know, this process continues.
Okay, that was a very difficult question. But I think, first of all, we have to, as I said already in the beginning, there are lots of diversity of feminisms out there. And, you know, there's cultural feminism, there's ecofeminism, there's, you know, there's actually a men's feminism, there's, you know, you name it. There are lots of theoretical ways of approaching certain issues. Again, my decision about which feminism is most important for my research has to do with what questions am I asking. That is the basis, because otherwise you kind of get lost. You get lost with, so as you said, there are so many ways of reimagining women and what it can be, and all of these kinds of things, order, underordning. So your questions, whatever it is, the question you want to ask, that is going to determine the kind of theoretical approach you will use. And of course, in the end, it will affect your methodology. So it's the question always. So I can't, you know, it would be kind of hard for me to say to you, well, this time you can just pick and choose which one, because it doesn't make any sense if I don't know the real question. So once you formulate a question, then you can start discussing what kind of theoretical approach would be most appropriate to give you, to be used as, if you will, as an analytical tool to find, try to find some answers. Yeah,
absolutely. And your, the way you elucidated your shifts from different, genres of feminisms kind of made me very curious, and thank you for the wonderful.
Yeah, well, I was, everybody starts off as a Marxist, don't we?
Absolutely.
And then, and you incorporate that. And I have to say, even though I've kind of shifted a little bit, my roots are still in classical Marxism. And I write sometimes, going back, especially when I write historical texts, because I feel comfortable there. That is, it makes me feel good. And I can, add overtones of intersectionality when I want to introduce other forms of marginalization as a way of analysis.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Thank you, ma'am. Batulji, could you please ask your question? I can read it out for her. So she's asked, she's asked, there has been a lot of online activism related to feminism. There has also seen a constant debate between the different types of feminisms and in which one is better. Can this lead setting feminists back because of internal fractionalization?
Hello. Hi, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Right. I'm so sorry. I did not have the option to unmute before. So yeah, of course, my question is as follows, because I've seen a lot of women and even men on, different social media platforms where they try to compare one feminism to the other. Like there have been a lot of radical feminists who call out liberal feminists for appropriating or normalizing certain patriarchal practices, and certain liberal feminists or Marxist feminists telling each other that they are wrong, right? So my question is, does this internal debate between feminists and their own ideological differences lead to their being lead to the larger feminist cause not being fulfilled in the future? Does that lead to a problem for us as feminists?
I don't think so. I think there's a lot to be said for debate. I think we need, I think it makes us stronger, actually, because it makes us hone our tools. It makes us sharpen our arguments. It makes us more ready for the struggle. So no, of course, it just makes us, I think it makes us better feminists because, this diversity of feminisms, whichever one I hold, whichever one I change to, the arguments are there and you have to be prepared to defend them. And I think this is very important in relation to the previous lecture from Dr. Pujari, which she was talking about these ways of knowing. I mean, not only do we have to kind of strengthen and sharpen our tools as feminists, we have to sharpen them in a way that is going to also help us in the struggle around this male-dominated epistemology. So no, I don't see it. It's it can feel a little bit hardcore, and as I said, somebody's going to feel uncomfortable. But I would say, go home, sharpen your argument, and come back and get back into the battle.
Right, ma'am. Also, if you don't mind, I have another question. Like, if that's okay. So my other question is that, of course, it's related to social media and how nowadays social media has been using a lot of these these things like trends which appropriate and normalize certain practices that men have been doing that oppresses women, and that that normalize these things like men not knowing basic domestic skills, men perpetuating violence on women, women being scared to go out in public, so on and so forth. Does social media and its reverse activism, or its I don't know what the word is for this, but does that lead to the newer generations or the generations that will come, let's say in the future, to fall back in the feminist cause?
I don't know. I mean, for me, social media and everything that goes there is like undocumented empirical data. It's just data out there. So, I mean, I think one of the things we have to maybe as researchers think about is we have to start trying to look at the way we use social media. We have to look at where is it coming from. We have, you know, one of the good thing about social media, it is there for everybody and we can get our points across to a wider audience. On the other hand, there's a lot of crazy people out there, a lot of really weird things going on. So we have to be cognizant of that as well. I mean, to be open to the fact that we don't know always all of the sources. We have to be careful about the way we, you know, I don't know, share things, who we share with, all of these kinds of things. We can't just do that reflexively. We have to, you know, really think about who is this person? The same way that we would talk about other forms of data, where do we get it? Who is the source? Can it be, is it a good source or is it somebody just trying to cause a disturbance? We don't know. So we have to be more conscientious of that as students or as people who are, you know, involved in social media. We can't take anything at face value. That's the only thing I can say there.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Professor Lane, my name is Abel Raj. I'm from Chennai.
Hi.
We run a thought leadership firm. We're a small team of folks. My question was, because you have talked about it, about the law. You said the law won't save us, and men have been making these laws until recently.
Yeah.
Regarding Dalit feminism, there's a supposed focus on the constitutional means of struggle because of Dr. Ambedkar's supposed focus on that. And so Ambedkarism is trying to be essentialized by different people into, let's say, constitutionalism and other things like that. And so you have to put faith in the law and the means of the law. But my question is, especially when the far right is really chipping away at constitutional values in India, how do you rate a strategy of, equipping or raising women to become enter electoral politics and become MPs in parliament, and then start shaping policy from inside the parliament? Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I can't speak to Indian policy because I'm too little informed, but I can tell you that in the American context, we have this, you know, generally the same kind of basic idea that was called equal opportunities law that came in the 1960s that was supposed to correct this historical, misdeeds of, the American government because of slavery in the United States and the systematic subjugation and exploitation of Black people. So these laws came into effect in the 1960s. And of course, my parents benefited from them and lots of others because the first generation, they were, given opportunities for higher education, these kinds of things, work, access to jobs. All of these things were very important. Now, maybe that's the case in, basic case in India, that the idea was to give opportunities for a group that had historically been disadvantaged. That is the law, or that was the law. It does not mean that in the American case that Black people or any other minority group that is non-white has perfectly been accepted into, European society or European American society. We still have lots of discrimination in the American society, even though we have the law. And nowadays, from the American perspective, we see these very strong conservative far-right groups who are trying to dismantle equal opportunities. So in this case, I would say that India is not alone, if that is the case here. Yeah. It is also happening in the United States and in Sweden, which is, has a very well-defined welfare state. We are looking now at, parliamentarians who are trying to dismantle parts of the welfare state because they feel that maybe it's giving marginalized groups too much advantage. So this is not something that's just happening if that is the case in India. On the other hand, and I think it is very important, one of the reasons why we talk about activism around feminism is the fact that if we have more women in politics and we have more women in parliament, then maybe the laws would look differently. That is, we would have, if we had 50% or more of women who were parliamentarians, we could break this male dominance of kind of having continued patriarchy in the name of the state. You know, that's the idealized situation. Is that going to happen tomorrow? No. But we have to be aspirational. So I wish I could tell you some really good news, but I think this is the case. We have to keep pushing to get people more involved in politics and get women to stay in politics. Because in both the American and the Swedish case, which I know well, they're getting so much backlash now from these ultra-conservatives that if they don't get support from women's movements and for other like-minded thinkers, they're overwhelmed by all of the assaults from these male-dominated groups. I don't know, this is taking too much time, but we just had the president of Harvard who was, she actually resigned, a Black woman who was very well qualified because of a social media person who nitpicked her, her research. But of course it was wrong. We as academicians, we know that, how we cite people and who is, but this person could, because of his position in social media, create a furrow of interest that in the end resulted in her resigning. So we need to have women supporting women, or groups of like-minded people, marginalized groups supporting each other all the way. And that's why I think that Audre Lorde's, this comment about don't let the others tell you that only your differences matter. Try to look at your differences as something that can create something that we can build together. So I hope that was helpful, but I'm not very sure.
I got it that there's a very strong pragmatic reason for women to be in electoral politics and parliament beyond the policy shaping also. Yeah.
Yes, numbers matter.
Numbers matter, correct.
Thank you, ma'am. Lastly, I'd just like to call Lalit ji to ask his questions. So I'll just...
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Ma'am, I'm Lalit Thapa, and what I would like to ask is, like, as a guy, whenever I have discussions about feminism and stuff similar to it with other guys, like there is always this thing of guys being like, I don't want to be called a feminist. Like, I believe in equality, but I don't want to be called a feminist. They say that feminism just means something else and that it's not really for equality, and I would like to be called something else and that stuff. So my question was, ma'am, like, do you think that men can be feminists, and like how can men actually contribute to feminist movements, and like how can they actually bring substantial change, etc.?
Well, I think men like women, if you believe in equality between, across all genders and sexualities, then for me, you're a feminist. And, I mean, it's, if that feels hard to bear, if you don't want to be called a feminist, so you can give yourself another name. But I think the most important thing is if you're prepared to work, actively to create the possibilities for equality in society. Because when women are equal, men are equal too. I mean, everybody gains through equality. You don't lose anything. Equality isn't about, if I give you 1% and then, if I give you, you'll only have 99%. The deal is if we are equal, then everybody wins. There is no, there's no limited amount of how much. So I would suggest that, maybe you could, I don't know if you're a student or a researcher, but I'm sure someplace around in your campus or in your, in your town, there are groups who are working. Maybe you don't feel that, something around family-centered feminism is the thing for you, but maybe you're interested in labor markets. Maybe you want to, make sure that there's, equality in the job market and making sure that women have a fair shake when they go for interviews. And all of these things, these are small, subtle ways in which you could show that you too want to see a change in the future. So yeah, that would be my only advice, to kind of actually get involved through whatever group or groups that you feel comfortable with. And maybe it takes a little bit of time till you feel more ready to join others and come out as a full-fledged feminist later on.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your insight. We hope to see you again at future IMPRI events. And yeah, thank you for sharing your wisdom and engaging the audience. We're truly grateful. Now I'd like to invite our next speaker for today. So I'm delighted to call upon Dr. Shewli Kumar for an address on post-colonial feminism. We welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. And I was listening to Professor Lane's explanation and the theoretical approach, which I use quite often in my work with the Dalit women's movement. So it really resonated with what she was explaining and telling. And I have a much more challenging task to now talk about post-colonial feminism, a topic that has been given to me. So I had to read up a bit and also kind of put it into a context which would be interesting for the audience out here, especially since it's fag end of the day. And I hope people are ready to listen to me. Let's hope for the best. Here goes. Okay, so we heard, about intersectional feminism. We also heard how that can be utilized to really understand women's realities, especially coming from marginalized populations. Post-colonial feminism is extremely interesting in terms of, unpacking the idea of and the theoretical premise of, feminism, and also about post-colonial reality. Why I'm saying this is, what is this, why are we talking of post-colonial feminism? It is also linked to generally understood as, an approach which should be looking at feminisms emerging from countries which were colonized. Actually, that's not true. Post-colonial theories look beyond the borders, beyond the geographical locations, and beyond the idea of feminisms that may emerge within different, what we call the southern nations, that is South Asian countries and others. But at the same time, there's a recognition that there is a South even in the North, and there is a North even in the South. So it can't be, located within this geographical paradigm. It has to go beyond that. What it does really, the post-colonial theories, what they do is questions the implicit referent for what is the universal social theory, which is the more larger hegemonic ideas of society and societal interaction, which we have been reading in, say, sociological understandings and many other, academic works, which are also known as classic texts in the academia. That is simply not about just about we question that it's not simply about the global North, but rather the inheritance of Euro-American paradigms of knowledge. And that's very important, that we question this idea of knowledge and knowledge production and theoretical paradigms, which we feel actually centers the rational action and actors and seek to find or impose this on many of the academicians, or not really even academicians, how academia is decided or how theory is defined, what is academic. All that aspect is questioned through the post-colonial theory. So it enables us to look at academia very differently, theory very differently, and also locates it within the wisdom of the people and their understanding of these realities. Such paradigms are essentially rooted in the history of social science. So just to give you an illustration, when the British people wrote about the Indian people and they archived and wrote about the culture of India, it came from a very, very colonial gaze and scientific approach. And so therefore we were labeled as natives, savages, and many other dimensions. There was a civilizational process, and we were the white man's burden to be civilized and trained and educated and taught. And so that kind of thought process has also percolated in the academic circuit today. It continues to hold on. And if you look at the kind of studies that we do in schools and colleges, there is a very clear understanding of, well, we are still developing as a nation. We still are culturally backward. We still have a lot of natives, saying the Adivasis living out here, and they don't really, they need to be brought up and they need to be modernized. So this modernity project also comes from this kind of colonial understanding of people and theorization of those people. So therefore, it is also based on how gendered characterizations happen and discrediting of certain kinds of knowledge systems and geographical locations, beyond geographical locations as well. They're not what post-colonial feminisms also, or theories of also talk about, is this kind of hegemony, since it's not geographically located, but they're also in ideas and theories across the world. So how you define poverty, who defines poverty, and how is it brought into the policy frameworks, that becomes, that needs to be unpacked, and that needs to be contextualized based on what is the reality in a particular kind of communities and societies. So that is what they question and say poverty, ill health, mental health, gender inequity, all these may be theorized in a particular way, and therefore we need to go beyond the boundaries, and we need to look at how we are going to, theorize it from the point of view of people who are seen more as subjects to be taught, rather than people who have knowledge, who have experiences, who can explain their reality far better than somebody else coming and teaching us how to look at our lives and realities. And the most seminal work that has been done by Chandra Talpade Mohanty, Under the Western Eyes. That's a book. You can use that as a reference to look at it. Addresses itself to the production of the third world women. So the third world women are the women who are living in third world countries. And the third world countries are India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Indonesia, and all these Southeast Asian and South Asian countries who are still developing. So the creation of the third world woman is something which is a homogenized, embodied process, a single monolithical subject, which is to be found even in feminist Western texts. So questioning this idea of feminisms that exist in the Western thought is something that Chandra Mohanty had brought forth in this work. And she uses the word colonization in a discursive sense, and talks of the appropriation of knowledge and scholarship on women in third world as part of feminist discourse originating in the West. So when this question was asked by a participant, that being a non-Dalit, can I write on Dalits? That is where post-colonial theories really help us, because how can I write about Dalit women if I'm not a Dalit is a question that we constantly interrogate. How we write about it, what content goes into it is what we need to interrogate. And therefore, when we engage with the post-colonial feminist theoretical approaches, we are able to do that. We are able to see how, where, what is the hegemony that I am perpetuating. Am I doing the same thing that Western theorists did, Western feminist theories did to the South Asian women and homogenized us? That is the question we need to interrogate. Feminism does not give us solutions. Feminism gives us a pathway towards egalitarianism, empowerment, and equal rights. And therefore, it will always be a struggle, because you're going against the stream. And that's what post-colonial theorists urge us to do, that, that we need to make sure that we are not falling into the trap of one kind of feminism, which is not really addressing what is the reality in the ground. So she qualifies the term Western feminism by conceding that this too is not a homogeneous stream of thought. Of course it isn't. Like we just discussed, and many of you brought in, that liberal feminism and radical feminisms and many other forms of feminism that exist. So it's not a monolithic construction, but she talks of a coherence of effects arising from the subject position adopted by these feminist writers that posits with third world women as the other. So, that becomes a major problem. So for her analysis of as a post-colonial feminist is that we need to look at this othering process. We need to look at what is it that brings in that othering and question it and interrogate it. She speaks of an inadequate self-consciousness that enables them to forget that they are privileged. That is, that there is no self-consciousness, or it is because you're socialized that way, so you don't question it. And you say that, well, I'm here and I look at third world women with this kind of perspective. I'm there to help them. I'm there to emancipate them. I'm also there to write about them. But I do not reflect as to where am I coming from? Is it coming from a sense of power? Is it coming from a sense of knowing everything? What is this knowledge that I'm talking of? Do I need to unpack? This reflexivity is not available. So they don't have that inadequate self-consciousness that enables them to forget that they are privileged and to assume that the patriarchy they experience is universal across cultures. And this has been highlighted, I'm sure, though I didn't listen to Dr. Leena Pujari, but I'm sure she highlighted because Dr. Linda brought it in, that no patriarchal experiences are different across different cultures. And that's the critique that is reaffirmed by post-colonial feminists. And that's something that we need to look at. So Mohanty objects to the Western feminist ideas on three principles, and this is very important for us. Firstly, the assumption of women as an already constituted coherent group with identical interests and desires, regardless of class, ethnic, or racial location. And that's where, it also resonates with the theory of intersectionality or contradictions, implies a notion of gender or sexual difference or even patriarchy as male dominance, men as correspondingly coherent group and homogeneous group, which can be applied universally and cross-culturally. This is one of the interrogative points that Mohanty brings on board. The second principle is related to the claim of universality of women's oppression. That is, this universalization of women's oppression is not really universal. There are different notions. Intersectionality approach brings in that aspect. And examples are then cited to prove that women everywhere are oppressed without paying attention of how that oppression manifests itself for women of different classes, race, ethnicities, in different work situations, countries, regions, and in different periods of history. So leaving out of context and diversities, let me illustrate out here and, put out here that, women from Adivasi communities, say in Chhattisgarh, their experience of oppression is very different. They are experiencing displacement for development. They are experiencing patriarchy within their homes. They are experiencing patriarchal displacement and violence from the state and from also other, extra state people. So their experience of oppression will be very different from a middle class woman who is experiencing sexual harassment, say in public transport system. So it's not universal. Even in a country like India, there is a lot of diversity. So the Irulas may be facing a different format of oppression than Irulas are a tribal community in southern India, than those who are living in Rajasthan. So this kind of, homogenization or universality, it creates its own problem. And historically also there are changes, and that principle needs to be questioned. The third principle that Mohanty points out is that these analytical strategies underscore the asymmetry of power between Western feminist scholars and third world women. We know how hard it is to struggle to gather and garner resources to do our feminist researches, our feminist engagements in the ground. We don't have that kind of resources of material and otherwise to engage and bring out newer theories or write articles. Just recently, we had written out an article on participatory research and we submitted it to a journal. And the journal asked us for 2,000 euros to publish it. well, we don't have 2,000 euros to publish it. We had to withdraw it. And that journal is very well known and read across the world. And we wanted to publish an Indian case study so that it could be read across the world. And we understood that the Indian context is very different and unique in terms of the research that we had done to the rest of the world. So we will not be able to be heard in the larger context because it's a paid publication. To bring in that, this asymmetry of power and publication and engagement comes from this kind of a power play, and that needs to be recognized and acknowledged. The latter are not just homogenized, they are othered and typecast. And we are also seeing a lot of poor women in our own country are typecast as ignorant, poor, uneducated, tradition-bound, domestic, family-oriented, victimized, etc. In my work with the Dalit women, they have always used the word survivor. They say that we don't want to use and we now in the feminist parlance in India, we don't want to use victimization as an approach. We say that we are a survivor, and it is the perpetrator who needs to be named in cases of sexual violence. Their caste needs to be called out, not my caste. So there is that discourse which the Western epistemologies and understandings may not be able to really address. And therefore, it's very, very important to talk about this and engage with this kind of understanding that exists in the larger world. And that's what the post-colonial the theorists and feminists talk about. Another seminal work is that of Gayatri Spivak, her 1988 essay, Can the Subaltern Speak?, which is an important example for the second type of post-colonial feminist text. The term post-colonialism refers to a body of writing of historians who contest the dominant account of history of former colonies written from the perspective of the imperialists. Post-colonial writing shifts that perspective, and that's very important. That's what Gayatri Spivak also has done continuously to interrogate this idea of writings and perspectives and epistemologies that the colonialists constantly lump on us and tell us that this is how your history was or is, and that there was sati pratha, there was widows were treated very badly. Yes, there were, but the context and the realities were very different. And what does the women say? What do the women say about this? That was never written out. And that's very important, that who are the people who are writing this history and in what kind of perspective and what kind of standpoint. That's very important. Edward Said has also elaborated that view that most Western scholarship, if you've read Orientalism, on the history and contemporary society of colonies, is part of the project of colonization. So you write and you still colonize. So ideas of development, for example, the theorization of feminist development also comes with that kind of a hegemony and that notion that this is how women should become. So we as women are struggling at different levels. In the morning we had a discussion on, we were talking about how can gender transformative strategies work, and in that context, there was this whole alignment that do I follow the Western feminist ideas, or do I conceptualize a newer theoretical approach? Do I listen to people who are saying that I do not want, I do not want to come into a collective scenario at this point because I want to ensure that I get water on time and that I don't have to spend 3 hours to fetch water, because that's oppression for me. That is a problem for me, and please do something about that, rather than you have this thing of everybody should come together, discuss, debate. That's not what I can do at this point. For me, that water is more important, that health facility is more important, because if those things are in place, then I can free myself up and my time to engage with the developmental activities which you want me to participate in. And that's what post-colonialism actually, I speak like a social work educator all the time, and you can hear me saying that. that's where the epistemic issues are, and epistemic violence is. That's very important. Spivak talks about it, and she says epistemic violence carried out by imperialism, where an episteme, using Foucault's idea, not in the context of just colonialism, but as the body of ideas which shape the perception of knowledge in a particular period. So that becomes very important for us. And therefore, we move from women in development as a concept and shifted to gender and development. And we are still not satisfied, because that is still not bringing in the intersectional voices that we require to really work and bring about equality, and women can live free from what we call is the structural violence. So imperialism undertakes the remotely orchestrated, far-flung and heterogeneous project to constitute the colonial subject as the other. This othering is what becomes real, and the other is then invisibilized. The other is then seen as somebody to work with, to bring them on board as the homogeneous entity. Post-colonialism and post-colonial theories attempts to restore that obliterated other. That means visibilize the voices of those who've never been heard. And there are plenty out there, and there were plenty out there before colonization and during colonization, but they were never written home about. So you had something like Sri Purush Tulana written at a point when we were still, the British were still out here, because of the education that she received from, due to the efforts of Jyotiba Phule and Savitribai Phule. So those are the voices, and that's the textual reference, but it's still not part of the larger curriculum. And that's the theoretical knowledge that post-colonialists talk about. So Spivak quotes one of its leading intellectuals who talks about subaltern studies and brought in a lot of work around it, called Ranjit Guha, on the objectives of this project of historiography. That's precisely what one is saying. The historiography of Indian nationalism, and we are critiquing ourselves, has for a long time been dominated by elitism, colonialist elitism, and bourgeois nationalist elitism, sharing the prejudice that the making of Indian nation and the development of the consciousness nationalism, which confirmed this process, were exclusively or predominantly elite achievements. We didn't talk about the peasants. We didn't talk about the peasant movements. We didn't talk of the farmers' movements. We didn't talk about the fish folks and fisher folks. We didn't talk about the women who were farming and who were landless laborers. We in the entire project of Indian nationalism, we got Indian nationalism on board, and we spoke about a modern India project. And still we didn't kind of think, except for maybe Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who brought it in and brought in the Dalit voice very strongly, and not just the Dalit voice, but also the principles in the constitution of our country. So he also was one of the elites who got the opportunity and could bring that in because he was part of the subaltern. She goes on to share that Guha was also alluding to the regional and local level elites, the dominant indigenous groups, who if belong to a social strata, what we know as the caste system, and more so in the middle class, hierarchically inferior to those of the dominant all Indian groups, acted in the interests of the latter and not in conformity to interests corresponding truly to their own social being. So if they belong to a social strata which was hierarchically inferior in the, they also got co-opted, and they also felt that that privilege that modernist education or modernist project brings in, they got into the co-option of it. And therefore, what she notes that Guha here uses as a terminology, she quotes Guha and says the Marxist concept of false consciousness. We may agree or we may not agree with Gayatri Spivak, but her work is seminal in terms of post-colonialist feminisms and writing it. For true subaltern groups whose identity is its difference, and that's what is very important, there is unrepresentable subaltern subject that can speak itself. The intellectual solution is not to abstain from representation. You cannot, the intellectual solution is not staying away from representation, but also to ensure that the subalterns speak. In many ways, that's what she's trying to say, that the intellectuals will have to represent, will represent, because that's how they thrive on theorization. But what about the unrepresentable subaltern subject? Can they speak? Can they theorize? Can they bring it on forth? That is the question that post-colonial feminists bring in. She brings in the notion of feminine at the very end of her own article in the Can the Subaltern Speaks, where she says, within the effaced itinerary of the subaltern subject, where it is obliterated and not there, the track of sexual difference is doubly effaced. And that's a very, very important point, that again, you can see a resonance with intersectional theorization, but at the same time, post-colonial feminism allows you to, experiment with newer thoughts and newer ideas and work with it when you are looking at or working with populations of women coming from different marginalities and subjectivities. And that's very important. If in the context of colonial production, the subaltern has no history and cannot speak, the subaltern as female is even more deeply in shadow. And therefore, we see a resurgence of historiographies from the subaltern today. Somebody like Jacinta Karkata, who writes about the city and displacement in her poem, O Sheher. So there are many such writings where they are questioning this whole idea of development, because she's an Adivasi writer. And that's what impacts her as a woman, as an Adivasi woman, and how she is, questioning this whole idea of development. So that's the theorization, that's the context, and that's what should be where the ways of looking at the world. We may talk about sustainable development goals. We are talking about, climate change. But right here in the ground, there are people, the women, who are questioning the whole idea of development and saying that this is not the way forward. Listen to us. And that theorization needs to be heard and given space. That's where Gayatri Spivak says that the subaltern can speak, but there's no history, there's no voice. So how do we even bring that on board? Representation of the subaltern, the paradox of the intellectual, because we are all intellectuals, including myself, the post-colonial historiography who undertakes to represent or to speak for the subaltern subject who has been effaced from history, she points out the difference between the two forms of representation signified by the German words Darstellen, depiction imposed on them from outside. How do you depict them? How do you theorize upon them or of them? And Wertrennen, a more political depiction, someone who has to speak for them, but more from the context of what the people are trying to say, the women are trying to say. So using rhetoric as persuasion, being able to say that this is who I am, this is what my experience is. And so make it a political project rather than Darstellen is what she kind of talks about. Spivak next uses the example of Hindu practice of sati, or self-immolation of widows, to demonstrate the practical effects of this elitism between Darstellen and Wertrennen in the process of representation. On the one hand, colonial officials seeking to abolish the practice of sati can be read as a case of white men saving brown women from brown men. While on the other hand, the Indian nativist riposte was that the women actually wanted to die. The two positions serves to legitimize one another, but both exclude the woman's voice and agency. And that's where we get lost. That what did the woman who was committing sati have to say? What does the woman, Roop Kanwar, had to say? We lost her voice. We didn't know what was her reality. Yeah, because she didn't speak. She was not allowed to speak. For example, Dalit women in a caste society. Dalits have so far had no voice in mainstream Indian feminism. At this point, yes, they are getting there, which has been led by upper caste, urban, highly educated women. But when upper caste feminists try to bring Dalit women into their agenda, there is still the danger that they're imposing on them a depiction from the outside. So we have to be careful about it. And Spivak warns us of doing that. There are answers to this, but at this point, I will continue. And it's something that I have experienced, and I know that you can't speak for someone. You can speak of someone, but with great deal of care and understanding of the subjectivity of that person. Without that, you can't move forward. And very rightly so, I'm going back to what Dr. Leena Lane said, that you need to participate in movements. You need to engage with people to really understand those contexts and why Dalit women say what they say. The othering of the subtle subaltern, the colonized subject, the woman, the Dalit, by privileged colonizer, man, upper caste women, can be seen by the latter as an intimate part of his personal identity. But its expression spills over into public space and humiliates the former. For example, writings by Dalit women stay out of the curriculum in mainstream education. That's huge. Very few, there is so much that has been written over the years, but they do not form part of general curriculum. I'm not talking of women's studies. I'm not talking of social work. I'm talking of general studies in schools and colleges, in sociological, when you study sociology, it's not there. They don't find a space as very important contemporary writing, which brings in the physical everyday humiliation in personal interactions, brings in how even today separate teacups are kept for Dalit women when they go to work in the homes of elite middle class women. So these are some things that need to be documented, has already been documented, but it needs to be taught in every class, every school. It should be a must read, but it is not. So in many ways, the colonized becomes still the subaltern and stays in the margin, because that oral historiography does not become the center of education, center of activism. And that's something very important. Bringing in here that, when feminist scholarship was picking up, Urmila Tai and Meenakshi Moon wrote that we also made history. They were Dalit women who had been part of the national movement, who had been part of the Ambedkarite movement, and they had to write out their participation, and strong participation, very articulate participation, wherein they fought side by side with Dr. B.R. Ambedkar for the emancipation of women, emancipation of Dalits, emancipation of the people from the country, from the Britishers, So that's very important. And Sharmila Rege is the other one who has written her book on Against the Madness of Manu, which refers to songs composed and sung by Dalit women on various occasions, like the celebration of Ambedkar's birth anniversary, or during the 1980s agitation for renaming of Marathwada University in Aurangabad. So, but then mainstream education does not still give it the kind of space that is required. And that becomes our critical analytical framework. And post-colonial feminist writings therefore become a must and bring forth these oral historiographies, and they ensure that it becomes part of mainstream education. So the scholarship brings forth the differential and diverse feminisms emanating from the ground, and that's very important, by scholars like Talpade, Spivak, Rege, and many others, whose personal experiences. I have my friend Manjula, who constantly talks about her narratives, and I keep telling her, please write out your story, because it's a very significant, important historiography of not just being a Dalit woman and growing up, but also being a Dalit woman activist who's bringing about radical change in the society, the work that she does. And very few people know that she's received so many awards in the upper caste domains, upper caste feminist parlance. She has had to push herself in those areas to bring forth the voices of Dalit women. Yeah. So in the Dalit women activism. So those personal experiences and realities then become very important, that shape their understanding of the oppressive nature of knowledge and knowledge creation processes. And that we need to acknowledge. And post-colonial theories bring that out. Post-colonial feminism brings in social location, That's very important. Need for acknowledging and bringing to the forefront knowledge that has been hitherto pushed into the margins as non-knowledge and commonplace and not really scholastic. Stories, they're not academic. Biographies, well, okay. So feminist processes do bring it in, but larger education, I'm not talking of feminist projects or women's studies, absolutely not, because even women's studies are ghettoized, you know, we know that. What is important is to bring it in the general educational processes, that this is also academic work, this is also knowledge, and this needs to be understood by everybody. So knowledge that is published and gets the best read is what is considered to be knowledge, but not the kind of writings that Dalit women write about them, their realities. And reggae, Sharmila Reggae tried to bring those into the forefront by documenting Dalit women's testimonials. Another very important and significant book which can be brought into post-colonial feminist work. It enables questioning the notions of hegemonic knowledge and scholarship, as well as to bring to the fore power and patriarchy of non-Western approaches of writing and research. It would be more Western approaches to writing and research, and bringing in power and patriarchy to non-Western writings and saying that this is possible and patriarchies that exist are differently located. So that's all I had to say in this particular lecture. I hope I was useful and you found it interesting.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your insightful session. Vibhuti, ma'am, over to you for your remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Shewli Kumar, for this brilliant exposition to post-colonial feminism. I think you have with examples, you have shown the relationship between post-colonial feminists and also intersectional feminist theory, and how different convergences are taking place. The critique of the first generation of feminist movement for being very, very universalist and insensitive to the women of the margin, that also you have brought out with examples. How your later part of your lecture talked about the contribution in terms of research methodology, plural streams of knowledge construction, where the oral narratives are very important, songs, then some of the testimonies, they also become very important in challenging the mainstream historiography. We can also add oral narratives captured by Nandini Oza, of the women active in the people active in the Narmada Bachao Andolan, or work done by Stri Shakti Sangatna in Hyderabad, where they interviewed women from who were very active in the Telangana people struggle in the 50s and 60s. We were making history, that life stories of women in Telangana people struggles. I think that is also very important. And I think work which the feminists from Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh have done about the impact of partition, I think that is also very important contribution to the post-colonial historiography, and how the displacement and dislocation, how does it impact? You give so many examples of what happens to women or tribal women when such mega development projects are coming. So I think it's a very important, and even for all the scholars, that what kind of only one thing about Orientalism I wanted you to speak more, because there is a very massive backlash against Edward Said's work in the recent times. So yeah, that's fine. But it was really extremely enlightening. All three speakers, they complemented each other and enriched our insights as well as understanding of feminism in theory and praxis. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. The floor is now open to questions.
There are already questions, yeah.
Yes, we can start with Ramisha ji.
The hands raised also. Please unmute yourself and ask. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, my question was regarding post-colonial feminist theories and Orientalism. So could that both be associated in any sense? So that was my question.
Okay, thank you. And
yes, ma'am.
Yeah, continue. Continue. You want to add something?
Orient.
Ma'am, that's it. Thank you so much.
Are you a student of history, Ramisha?
No, ma'am, I'm a student of sociology.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it is in any way associated with Orientalism. Gayatri Spivak brings it as an illustrative point, but Edward Said has, as Professor Vibhuti rightly said, has been critiqued a lot in terms of, looking at viewing societies from not really unpacking the oppressiveness of women and the ways in which the idea of, you essentialize certain sets of women. You don't look at the oppressiveness within. It's what is called cultural relativism. That you kind of say that, it's okay if there is female genital mutilation. You in the name of Orientalism, and feminists definitely do not agree on that. What they say is that it's very important that listen to what the women want. Women are doing work around FGM, but who are these women? You and I may not be subjected to it, but the women who are subjected to it are the ones who can evolve a theorization, evolve a strategy around addressing this. And they know how to go about it. We as people who do not experience certain realities will not be able to, should not, because then we are coming with a very hegemonic idea of rescuing that woman.
Correct.
And rescuing her out of that oppressive space, and that I think is problematic. So Orientalism does not give us that opportunity, and in fact often essentializes this kind of experience. There are more critiques of Orientalism. I'm not going into it, but I think that's where post-colonialist women do not agree completely.
And even there is a backlash from the left also, that Orientalism doesn't take into consideration the economic inequality. So you put only the cultural expression you are giving and cultural analysis you are giving, but what about the material reality? So that is so that when you talk about the Arab world also is a class division. There are despots and dictators who don't give any rights to or civil liberties or human rights of the working class are also violated. So will you always see the reality contradiction only in terms of imperialism versus Arab world, and you just show Arab world as a martyr without seeing the differentiation within the society, within the nation state?
Yeah.
May I make just a short comment here?
Yeah.
I was just thinking quite simply about the fact that, as you said, Dr. Kumar, we this hegemonic imposal of our ideas on the other, without considering that the fact that we as women are also limited in the West. We don't think about ourselves as being part and parcel of the same kind of patriarchy. We see it as, oh, those poor people over there who are having this problem, it has nothing to do with us. But if we look around us, we see that we are also limited in our views by patriarchy in the same way. But of course, we are the hegemony, so we don't see ourselves as part of the problem. The whole idea of relativism that you were speaking of.
That's what the South African feminists told, the white women who were enjoying all the privileges of apartheid, and they were calling themselves feminist and talking about universal sisterhood. But they did not question. They got all the privileges of the white patriarchy and the apartheid system.
Yeah, true.
Thank you, ma'am. Jagadhatri ji, would you like to take your question up now?
Jagadhatri.
Good evening, ma'am. So my question was, this is while we were having a discussion over here, so I had a thing in my head. So when we generally have this conception, like we take the Eurocentric perspective as vantage point to understand the subject under study. For in case here are women. We talked about standpoint theory, which is very essential. But when we talk about the progress of knowledge, it is not just central to the standpoint theory, and I feel like it is also dominated and is interconnected to various domain of thought. So, is it very important? So, I feel it is important to unpack the West and non-West perspective. So, I would say uh, these are not independent spaces of thought. Is it so, uh, or are these interconnected?
That's a very important question. And you know what you have raised in terms of standpoint. Standpoint theory, actually, what Sandra Harding says is, again, it's how you use it. You know, how do you look at it? That's very important. It gives us an opportunity to, again, go back to the same thing, that what does the woman want and who is this woman you're talking about? How are you doing research? It again enables, you know, this thought of feminist reflexivity is very important. Who are you speaking for? You speak for yourself and my realities, then that's my standpoint and my community. Say maybe middle class, upper caste women. Now I'm going to talk about dowry, or I'm going to talk about domestic violence, the way it exists in my life. That's my standpoint, and I'm researching that, you know, then fair enough. Yes, there is a standpoint out there, which is also important. It's not to, you know, say that that is not real. That's important and significant. So I work on that and I do research on that. And I try to understand, how are the women saying that I want to go back to the same household where I'm violated. Just make the violence stop. You know, that's what she says. Because there is a material reason for that, doing that. There's an investment that's gone out there. So if she's saying that, I can't say that, no, let's take them to the courts, you know, because they don't want that. They want the violence to stop. So this is where your standpoint theory is very useful. You know, you're able to then theorize around it. You're able to do your research well from this kind of a perspective. And that's very enabling. You can see the interconnectedness of different theories. You can look at intersectionality. You can look at post-colonialism. But then you need to have deeper understanding of all these theorizations. You have to also understand how research has been done using these theorizations. What suits your topic, your subject is very important. What do you choose to research? As I gave you an illustrative example of domestic violence amongst middle-class women, then I would, maybe the standpoint theory will help me. But if I'm going to do sexual violence of Dalit women, then I would much rather use, you know, intersectional theory, because that enables me to better locate that reality. And I would like to listen to the Dalit women and see what they have to say. So I would like to use a participatory approach. So all that defines how I do my research. The topic decides what kind of research I want to do and how I use a theoretical positioning or epistemology. That's how it goes. I hope I'm able to answer. If somebody else wants to contribute.
Thank you, ma'am. I have another question. Could I please ask? I just want to know about the resources which I could avail for Adivasi women and gender justice. Like, could you highlight upon that?
In the sense of writings?
Yes, writing and reading.
I'll send some more. I have already sent something, but on Adivasi specifically, I can send some more readings to the resource persons, and they can send it across if that's okay with you. Otherwise, Adivani, there's unfortunately, Adivani is one publication which publishes a lot of writings by Adivasi women, which are largely stories and poems. So if you want to look at
Nirmala Puttul's work also. Nirmala Puttul from Jharkhand. She had also done Soni Sori's writings.
Soni Sori's also writes. So there's literature available which you can use.
Now, even the testimony of this one, our friend from Rajasthan, PUCL activist, Bhavri Devi.
Bhavri Devi, yeah.
Oh, yeah, Bhavri Devi, yes.
Her testimony is also now very detailed testimony, which also shows the power dynamics at a micro level and her struggle at a state, subnational and the national level.
Her speeches are also now available on YouTube. You can listen to her if you like. Since you're young people and you like to use a lot of social media, so you can just get her, you know, narratives on.
Thank you, ma'am.
Even her acceptance speech recently for the Ladli Media Award for an extraordinary.
Thank you, ma'am. Abel Raji, do you want to ask your question now?
Yeah. Hello. Chat was written in the chat.
Yes, I can.
Abel Raj. Hello.
Okay, I didn't catch my name right.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, as you were talking, Dr. Shewli, about the Sati reform as colonial imposition from Spivak's perspective. The women actually wanted to die, and white men saving brown women from brown men. So I was just wondering that the voice of the immolating woman was not heard. Of course, that's true. But what if that voice is actually extreme Brahmanical patriarchy that has been internalized over centuries? So that is not really the voice of the self-interest of the immolating upper caste woman. Because the Shudra or Adi Shudra woman didn't practice it, but weren't compelled to do that. So it's a false voice, something like false consciousness. So what would you, I'd like to hear a response, Dr. Shewli. Just my wonderings.
It's very interesting that you asked that question. And let me tell you that when as activists, I was very young at that time. I really didn't go to the field, but I heard people and I was part of those groups and discussions. When people went to Rup Kanwar's village to really understand what happened, it was very clear that Rup Kanwar was not a voluntarily immolating herself. Whether it was during the Bengal, or most of the immolations were actually understood as a Bengali, reality. And what was happening was children, they were getting married very early. And there are also stories that are written. The child marriage was rampant. And what was this child marriage coming from? The unfortunate realities of famine that was there in Bengal. And so young girls were getting married off to older men who were much older to them in age. And why were they being immolated? It was linked to patriarchy. The women didn't have, the girls didn't have any agency, but if you ask them, they would say, I don't want to burn on the pyre. The point is that how do you see that reality? How do you articulate that reality? The rescue mission was launched by the Britishers, that, the Bengali culture believes in burning its women, and the women they need to be rescued. That language is problematic. The point is that they were responsible for these sati immolations because they had created material want in Bengal, because they had deprived the farmers from using their produce and living a better life. And so they were burning the daughters, the wives, they were marrying them off early. The structural reasons for this was never written out in history.
And even those narratives of the missionaries, the way they glorified about that Sati in Vadodara, my native place, and they said, oh, she's decked up nicely and she's she looks divine and she enters the fire as if you are entering water. No, this is the kind of the descriptions they have given without understanding the reality. And first of all, the Mitakshara laws, which were earlier Daya Bhaga was introduced by the colonial rulers, and to deprive them of the property right, it was happening. One thing that happened with the abolition of Sati, that so many families started taking their widows and leaving them at Kashi or this thing, or the pilgrimage centers. They would take them and just leave them there. So that too happened because of this. But I think the whole thing of a civilizing mission, that is the kind of same issues Savitribai Phule also fought against. She also fought against child marriage. She fought against abject condition of the widows. She fought against female infanticide. But from the point of view of solidarity, empathy, without creating this kind of a political agenda, that these are the people who are savage, barbaric, and of this thing. They without colonial rulers, this country cannot come up, and that's why. And Macaulay openly telling that I want to create coconuts who would be outwardly brown, but inwardly they would be white. And so the white supremacy in terms of the white aesthetics, white culture, white way of life, of the choices, everything would be internalized by the Indians. So that is linking it up with that. Not that we are glorifying Sati, or we are not empathetic, or we don't consider that we should fight. Same thing happened. Child marriages have increased in a post-COVID era. We are fighting against child marriage at an operational level. We are supporting the women's organization are directly intervening. But keeping in touch that under what circumstances it is happening. We are not making any casteist or communalist or any chauvinist sectarian statements while getting involved in anti-child marriage campaign.
Yeah.
So, can I have I understood right that the imperialists actually created the material conditions that aggravated the practice of sati, and they were not in solidarity, but it was a kind of elitism that they practiced in
even the
saying they are
poverty that was
abolishing
created.
sati.
Yes, poverty. You read
Poverty was
recently now,
created.
Navjivan has published, 3 historians have come together. They are coming out with 6 volumes called Thumb Printed, how the East India Company took away the land, all those areas where it was a water, the water supply was this thing, there was very high. They were taking 3 crops a year. All this land was taken away for the commercial crop of indigo farming, and the pauperization, immiserization, and hunger was created. Within that, this thing, how the patriarchy opted for child marriages and so many barbaric practices against women. No? Plus, even the hunger created during the Bengal famine, it was not created by the mother nature or this. Everything, food was diverted to sponsor the war, First World War and Second World War. So it was artificially, the scarcity of food grain was not because of the population bomb, the way Adam Smith explains in Wealth of Nations, the father of economics, talking about it. It is not the population bomb. It is a diversion of the food crops, the ample crop which we had for sponsoring the war. No, so you can't just tell half truths in the history. No, so that is what.
Half truth makes a full lie. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, Ria.
Ma'am, my question is,
can you
ma'am,
go
also
via
related to
one after
Ma'am, I just want to say regarding sati that the initiative to stop sati pratha initiated by Raja Ram Mohan Rai, not British government. British government just passed the law. So initiative was from our society also. Just British government.
Yeah, but Raja Ram Mohan Rai's perspective and the colonial ruler's perspective, East India Company's perspective, diametrically opposite. There was no solidarity, empathy. It was more of a colonial project of civilizing, rationalizing colonial rule. No, that is what we are saying. Yeah, in fact, in drafting of the Sati Prohibition Act also, Raja Ram Mohan Rai played a pivotal role.
Big role.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Mahendra Sandhu here. Ma'am, my question is that when women is depressed and marginalized in the South Asian countries, and they normally they look forward the Western countries, and do you think that this is critical or uncritical endorsement of the non-state actors?
First of all, I would say that women in South Asian societies are not depressed, but they have a lot of agency. They know exactly what they want. And that is why they go to places and spaces where they can secure better material benefits and move abroad, So that in itself, they're looking at opportunities. Let us be very clear, While the West, or I would say the colonialists, ruled over us and took away our material, created a lot of material deprivation for us, which has led to all kinds of problems. Why should we be, as South Asian women, we be stopped to access resources which are available in the West? That's first. And they do it with great deal of agency. They do it with a great deal of understanding as to why they are going to the West. If you have a conversation with a lot of young women who are living in different countries in Europe and US and UK, they've gone there because they want to escape certain problems within their own familial context, and patriarchy is there. Here, today, the context is very different. And they also know that those opportunities will give them further further empowerment, and they will be able to access different kinds of benefits. So they take a conscious choice here, and that is what needs to be understood. So I wouldn't say that they're depressed or upset. They go there with a lot of thought and thinking and use their agency out there. So
and there is
that's
also transnational solidarity, no? There is also transnational solidarity that emerges from the post-colonial perspective, no? Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because they continue to work with us. It's you create a beyond bridge. So today the Dalit movement has moved to make caste as a problem, as a discriminatory social issue in the US. They've succeeded in making laws passed. Shama, forgetting her surname, she ensured that Seattle made that caste is a discriminatory stratification. Caste has to be done away with. So that transnational mobilization, if you follow the Dalit movement, you'll see from the local to the global how they have moved in that context. And thank you, Vibhuti.
Even challenge the ITs, no? Like Google and
yeah, absolutely.
Challenge their casteism and
yeah. And they fight it there, and make sure there's more space. So for women to access. So that's very important.
I would just like to point out that this is, when I said the law matters, I mean, it's not everything, but the law matters. And by being able to take advantage of the American law in this regard, I mean, that was probably produced under this whole guise of equal opportunity. You could move a step further in the Indian context by reference to the fact that we are making this difference in the Americans. So, nobody wants to be the one holding the card in the last moment. So I think these, the law is not everything. It is that, as I said, is aspirational. It says, these are the kinds of people we want to be. Nobody wants to say that I'm here as a discriminator of people of caste. So I think it's important. It's an important result.
Thank you, ma'am. Lastly, I'd just like to ask Barbara Ji to ask her question.
Barbara Sangha. Can you unmute, Barbara Ji? Hello.
I can read out a question from the chat box if possible.
Okay. Yeah.
So she's asked, what do you think about feminism with reference to the Northeast Indian tribes?
It's very interesting. This question also bringing in, the women from the margins. Northeast, first of all, is not a homogeneous, and you would agree, it's not a homogeneous space. You have different communities living there, which tribal communities are also very diverse from each other, and today Manipur is, of course, an example of these contestations that go on. Interestingly, the Nagaland Naga Women's Association has, succeeded in getting voter rights. So the feminist locations, feminist theorizations again emanates from the tribal communities out there. Their understanding of motherhood, their understanding of feminism is located within their community context, and yet they understand the patriarchy is within, but they are not totally colored by the ways in which we look at feminism. So they have in fact decolonized a whole lot of feminist perspectives, and conversations with them tell us that it's located. So Naga women will have their own feminist standpoint and understanding. So they would like to unpack patriarchy in a different way, especially in local governance. And they bring that on board when you have conversations with them, and they've written home about it. You will find writings by Rosemary and many others who have written on so one can share those writings. So in Manipur, the once upon a time we talked about the Meitei women, and today we don't know where we are. We are a little lost out there at this point as to who's the what kind of feminist articulations they are bringing in. But they were fighting against the state and state as an entity. So their feminist ideology emanated at mothers of children who have been taken away by the state or killed by the state. So that's the way they would articulate it. Similarly, other tribal communities, the Khasi community, in fact, the women there supposed to have all the property rights. But then now they are questioning and saying that even though we may have rights to property directly from our own family, but the management and control and access to that property is in the hands of the men. So there are writings like that. Now, their feminist perspective is very different and, embedded in their realities of why property, forest, land is more important than anything else. So maybe they will never talk of sexual violence, but they will talk of property rights, because that's the way they are engaging in terms of the Khasi community. So there are different diverse formats of feminisms that they are articulating and writing home about, and also doing activism around that. So that's how
also
it is.
Participation in political processes, in the electoral process. Even different tribes have different rules, and also in marriage outside their tribe. No, that is also young women are.
That's also a problem, because there is this whole thing of marrying an outsider and bringing them into so they'll get all the property rights. So
that's correct.
There's that kind of issues that are there,
Land-based,
which are very
economic,
yeah,
subsistence economy.
Absolutely. So that's a different articulation completely.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We're truly grateful to you today for sharing your insights and for your presentation. We hope to see you again soon for other future IMPRI events. Professor Vibhuti Patel, ma'am, I would like to invite you for your closing remarks.
Yeah, I think today we had a very, very energetic sessions, because we started with epistemology of feminism, and I think so many trends of feminism that shows the dynamism within feminism, where you have different ways, worldviews, and different ways of dealing with patriarchy. But I think the debate goes on, and that's what we have seen, that over the last 50 years, the kind of debates that have taken place. Maybe there are plural ways of construction of knowledge, as well as putting that knowledge into praxis. But I think one thing is very important with the feminist movement is that in last 50 years, we see that the only two movements, according to me, have flourished. One is a fundamentalism, other one is feminism. And I think that we need to, that such a gigantic forces, extremely brutal forces, the only force which has been able to challenge it is feminism. We don't have weapons, we don't have any muscle power, we don't have mafia power, we don't have money power. Still, it is our commitment to the women's solidarity, collective wisdom, and continuous debate, and the dynamism that we have in the feminist discourses. I think that is the major strength of feminist movement and feminist theorization, as well as feminist praxis, because we have an agenda. It is not knowledge for knowledge's sake. It is a knowledge for transformative processes, which leads to liberation of humankind. That's what we always say. Nari mukti ke saath saath manav mukti laake rahenge. Along with women's liberation, there'll be liberation of humankind, and human liberation cannot be possible without women's liberation. That is what has been the understanding of women's movement. I think we went into so many complex processes of material reality, macroeconomic policies, laws, the intersectional perspective. All of them were discussed today. So I think that has made our understanding really enriched, and you are also given enough reading material. And I think the participants themselves have done a lot of homework, and that is reflected in the kind of discussions and questions that have emerged. And I find it's a very rewarding, intellectually rewarding experience that all of us had today. Thank you very much to our resource persons. All three resource persons have remained with us from the beginning till end. It's such a long session that shows their commitment, and also the IMPRI team, which has put in so much of work before the workshop, and now for coming 3 days that they are working in unison. And all these young members of IMPRI, I think I admire their commitment to the cause of feminism.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I must say the questions were excellent. For all the sessions.
Yeah.
Very reflective, thoughtful, engaging, really good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Good night.
Thank you
so much, ma'am. Thank you so much. We're truly grateful to all who've been part of today's event. With day one coming to a close, we eagerly anticipate your return for day two, where we have presentations by Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, Dr. Chitra Sinha ji, Professor Saumya Uma ji. Thank you, everyone. As we come to an end of day one of Feminism, Theory and Praxis, an online international winter school program, a 3-day immersive online certificate training course, I, Remat Arora, researcher, IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI Gender Impact Study Center. We're grateful to our experts for day one, Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, Dr. Leena Pujari ji, Professor Linda Lane ji, and Dr. Shewli Kumar ji, for taking out their valuable time and giving an opportunity to the participants to learn from this online certificate program. We thank all our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. Readings for the session have been shared in your email, and a video of the session will also be shared for you for your learning. We look forward to welcoming you for our second session of the certificate course on the 24th of January at 4 p.m., which is tomorrow. We're grateful if you're watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publication. We hope you continue to join in the future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.